All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order of Orangeville Town Council for Tuesday, February the 2nd, 2020. Due to efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19 and to protect all individuals, the council chambers of Town Hall will not be open to the public to attend council meetings until further notice. Members of the public who have an interest in a matter listed on the agenda may, up until 10 a.m. on the day of a scheduled council meeting, email councilagenda@orangeville.ca indicating your request to speak to a matter listed on the agenda. A phone number and conference ID code will be provided to you so that you can join the virtual meeting and provide your comments to council. Members of the public wishing to raise a question during the public question period of the council meeting may, beginning at 8:30 p.m. on the evening of the council meeting, call 1-289-801-5774 and enter conference ID 890-423-267#. Correspondence or emails submitted will be considered as public information and entered into the public record. If you require access to information in an alternate format, please contact the Clerk's Division by phone at 519-941-0440, extension 2256, or via email at clerksdepartment@orangeville.ca. May I have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Councillor Post, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor?
Yes.
Thank you. Any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest by councillors? Seeing none, we'd like to move to the singing of our national anthem, please.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you, David Nair, Artistic Director of Theatre Orangeville. We would like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa of the Three Fires Confederacy. This meeting is being aired on public television and or streamed live or may be taken broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. Okay, I guess we'll move on to presentations. Madam Treasurer, are you up?
Yes, I am, Your Worship. Just a moment. Your Worship, can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Your screen, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Council, welcome to night 2 of 2021 budget presentation. So tonight our focus is on operating budget. I will be presenting divisional budget for administration, corporate allocations, and police. And my presentation will be followed by 3 departmental operating budget presented by Ms. McKinney, Mr. Osmond, and Mr. Jones. I will then come back online again and will provide a brief overview of our long-term financial outlook. And I will conclude tonight's presentation by tabling my recommendation for 2021 consolidated budget. As Council would recall, on January 18, when I tabled a 2021 budget, I ended the presentation with this pie chart. This chart shows percentage of levy requirement for the 17 divisions across the organization. Tonight, we will take a closer look at the operating levy requirement for each of these 17 divisions. And as we go through these slides, we will also highlight, the presenters will also highlight any material drivers that are impacting year-over-year tax increase. So moving along, the first slide before you shows council, committees, and administration. So administration is essentially CAO's division. So as you can already see on the screen, for council and administration, the 2021 proposed levy over 2020 approved levy, the increases are extremely minor and are essentially inflationary in nature. So the material driver on this slide is the committee's budget. Now, the increase is not due to any increase in expenditure line. It is due to the relocation of police services budget from former OPS to committees, and committees seem to be the most logical place to relocate the PSP budget. So the next is corporate allocations. This year, we were able to find savings and synergies from last year due to two major material drivers. The first one is the reduction in tax write-off. As council is already aware, municipalities go through property assessment or reassessment, I should say, every 4 years. And 2021 was supposed to be the first of 4 years of reassessment. However, due to COVID-19, last year, province decided to freeze reassessment for 2021. As a result, some of the tax write-off, and usually the first year of the reassessment, we do see a higher number of tax write-off. So some of the tax write-offs that we were anticipating, we will not, at least not to the level. In fact, we are anticipating anywhere from 60 to 70% reduction. So we took full advantage of that, and while we were building our budget, we made sure that that adjustment and that reduction is properly reflected. In the outer year, we did adjust our budget back again to make sure that in the future year, when these write-offs come back up again, we do have that expenditure line fully accommodated and equipped to face any future write-offs. So that's one of the material drivers. The other material driver, which is not so much, it's just a marginal driver, is the marginal reduction in reserve contribution in 2021 to offset any COVID-19 levy pressures. Council would also note that in the subsequent year of the multi-year budget, we made sure that any marginal reduction that we have incorporated in 2021 is brought back up in the subsequent years. So the next divisional budget is police. Now, we are already seeing reduction in levy pressure due to the transition that happened last year between Orangeville Police Services to Ontario Policing Force, from OPS to OPP. On January 18th, I did provide some input and some points for council to consider. And what I would do tonight is sort of expand on those points. So the first thing, the graph on the left side of my screen or on your screen shows the 5-year billing projection for OPP. As council is aware, we are in the first year of a 3-year transitional billing model. This billing model is based on FTE contract. In the first 3 years, yes, we will be seeing savings. However, when you look at year 4 and year 5, and clearly beyond that, year 4 or 2024 will be the first year of OPP standardized billing. Before I go any further, I just would like to make a quick point and a quick mention that OPP is a provincial agency and they serve more than 300 municipalities across the province. Their billing practices and billing model is very standardized. So what we are seeing is not unique to the town of Orangeville. And a transition process does go through anywhere from 1 to 3 years of transitional billing model. So one of the questions leading up to tonight's presentation, I have been asked, or there were discussion around it, is, so Nandini, you're showing this graph, but we also have numbers and presentation from 2019 when the consultants hired by the town provided some numbers. Absolutely. And if you look at the graph itself, you will see that some of the numbers that I'm presenting here based on the OPP standardized billing model actually mirror some of the numbers that the consultant provided to council during the 2019 vetting period or during the 2019 reporting period. But aside from that, what I really would like to expand on and what I really would like council to consider are some of the points that I'm indicating on this slide. The first one is just looking at financial modeling or forecasting. By the way, annual budget exercise, the one we are partaking right now, is also an exercise of financial modeling and forecasting. And any financial forecasting is based on number of assumptions, and there are a number of variables one must take into consideration when building whether an annual budget or a police services transition model. The point I'm making is this: at any given point subsequent to presenting that model or presenting that forecast, things may change, variables may change. So how does this relate back to the 2021 budget? So one of the things we did, first of all, we are only 4 months into this transition. So clearly it is too early and too premature to know the overall impact. And when I say impact, I mean savings of how this will all play out. But when we were, we as in myself and my colleagues, when we started building 2021 budget, we had to look into the cost side of the OPP billing as well as any revenue that will come our way. So there are, due to COVID-19, there are some uncertainty with regards to provincial grants for court security, prisoner transportation, 1,000 officers, etc. So what we did collectively is we decided to take a conservative approach, and we reduced the projection for revenue for the upcoming years. Now, this approach would have been the same regardless of whether we were with OPP or OPS. So the point I'm making, council, tonight and to all the listening public is that when we are looking at modeling and forecasting, you have to keep in mind that at the time of the forecast that the consultants made, he took into account some assumptions. Clearly, pandemic or the global pandemic that we're encased in wasn't part and parcel of those assumptions. And clearly, as we can see right now, some of the variables are changing. One of the examples I've already given to you in terms of some of the grants that we probably will see reduction given the uncertainty around it. The other point I would like to make is that with any financial forecasting, the longer the horizon, the larger the margin of error. So let me relate back to the annual budget process. So we have a 10-year capital plan. The chances of year 9 and 10 of that capital plan and the numbers projected, the likelihood of those numbers changing is way higher than year 1 or 2. So the point I'm making is when you're looking at a 16-year horizon, you have to factor in the margin of error. And that goes for any financial forecasting. Now, the last point I would like to make on this topic is, yes, we will be seeing savings more so in the outer years and as we move more toward the OPP standardized billing model. So what does that mean for the overall base budget for the municipality? So one of the recommendations I've made in the document itself is that as these savings are realized in the next 3 years and the years beyond, we keep our base budget intact. However, we reallocate future savings to some of the unfunded council priorities. We reallocate this towards our infrastructure deficit. And one of the final one that I'm going to speak to tonight is we can also use that future savings to build our reserves. One particular one that comes to mind is our tax stabilization reserve. That reserve, the tax stabilization, is designed to mitigate any in-year tax levy increase. In fact, that reserve is designed to tap into in a year like this when we are facing a global pandemic and everybody's suffering due to that. So essentially, these are the points that I would ask council as well as the listening audience to factor in when they're looking at, first and foremost, and if you are going to compare what we are showing through our budget versus what the consultant has provided, like I said, we're only 4 months into it. Please keep in mind some of the points that I'm asking you to consider. With that being said, we will now move on to the larger departments and the divisions under them. So the first one is corporate services. Over to you, Ms. McKinney.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So this slide is a visual representation. I'm sorry, I'm getting it. Okay, thank you. So this slide is a visual representation of the changes in the operating budget of corporate services. Our material drivers are showcased on the right. We have had what I would suggest is the privilege and the opportunity to have 2 members of the OPS choose to join the town rather than taking severance, and have come over in the HR department and in the bylaw department, providing a suite of services that are to our benefit, and that was entirely voluntary, and we sincerely appreciate that. Another key driver is the chargebacks that corporate services previously would have billed to the OPS, which was really just a portion of the staff time, but nonetheless did represent a delta when the OPS cost center went away. So that has been reallocated into corporate services to keep those teams whole. We have a new request for an admin assistant or potentially an EA for corporate services. It's a department that exists without any admin support, so that's what that's for, as well as some temporary records management support in both the clerk's department, which is offset by reserves to keep going with the categorization and ultimately the digitization of the town's records, as well as support for the OPS records that require similar treatment. And so the last piece there is corporate training. We had this asked last year, we're bringing it forward again. And this is continuing along with our investment in engagement, culture, wellness, and a number of initiatives that are relevant for upskilling the skills of staff at the town. That's it.
Over to community services. Mr. Osmond, please.
Ray, I think you're muted.
My apologies, my button moved. Good evening, council and members of the public. Sorry, slight adjustment. If I could go to the next slide, thank you. So operating budget 21, from my perspective and from the perspective of our team, the year is kind of status quo from our perspective across the board. We have some slight changes. The biggest driver, if you would, in terms of facilities is where our biggest driver is too, and this year we have picked up another facility. As you know, over the last couple of years, the community services has expanded to take in, we're up now to I think 13 facilities across the corporation. And we now picked up the OPS building, which is now the OPP are housed in, and that building now falls under community services and under facilities. And that will see a expenditure a little over $140,000 a year. And that transition piece is a piece that we're going to need to go through a cycle to get a good handle on exactly some of the nuances, if you would, that happen in this building. Now we know a lot of things that we can track, such as your natural gas and those kinds of things, but we need to go through a full cycle. And that will be one of the biggest changes in our operation. The second biggest change, as you see, and I mentioned in the tourism and culture piece, is that we're asking for a tourism and culture officer to complement the staff at economic development, which is a pretty busy, it's a small crew and a very busy crew. But I think that we are extremely committed to moving the tourism agenda forward. And as you can see through the number one recommendation in the tourism strategy and work plan was the hiring of a culture officer, a tourism culture officer to engage that area in the community and build tourism in the community and work with the stakeholders and so on. And that would be a big lift up, if you would, to the economic development area. Other areas are slight changes, you know, and they're based on inflationary changes. We did, of course, in 2020 and in 21, we're seeing changes in our revenue, which we're trying to mitigate in terms of expense by absorbing where we can. In terms of we have layoffs of staff, we have a little over 100 plus staff laid off at this point, and we'll have to see that as it evolves throughout the year. The problem for our operation, of course, is that we are basically at the mercy right now of the pandemic, and the pandemic continues, and we continue to I hate to use the word, but pivot and move as things change. And we're open for more positive change as we get into mid-year. So our budget reflects it to a certain degree. And one of the other big changes, of course, we are losing Umber in 21, and they've been a great client of ours, and they've been in the building for years. And we'll lose them in May, and that'll change revenue-wise and operation-wise as well. So that's our budget. It's pretty straightforward, I think, from our perspective, and it's there for everybody to view. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Osmond.
Over to Infrastructure Services. Mr. Jones, please.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Good evening, Mayor Brown, members of council, and residents watching online. Infrastructure Services operating budget is somewhat different from those of the other two departments in that it includes areas that are self-funded. The divisional budgets for corporate services and community services identify expenses net of revenue as the total divisional budget amounts. So those are the numbers that you saw on the tops of the bar graphs that you were just seeing. The same is true for the planning division, public works, transit, and cemetery areas of the infrastructure services budget. However, the water, wastewater, and building budgets have no impact on the tax levy as they are all self-funded. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the proposed budgetary changes from 2020 to 2021 for the tax levy funded areas of infrastructure services. Neither the planning nor the cemetery budget show a significant change in 2021. The proposed public works budget increases by approximately $138,000, or about 2.8%. The main drivers for this increase are additional funds for boulevard tree planting, a portion of the salary for a proposed infrastructure services technician, and a part of the salary for the sustainability coordinator position. The proposed transit budget also increases by approximately $100,000, and the primary driver for that is the cost associated with moving from a 3-route system to a 4-route system. For the purposes of budgeting, staff have assumed that that would take place at the start of July, so we've added the cost for a 4-route system for 6 months into this budget. Next slide, please. This slide is different from the previous slides that you've seen, as this is for the self-funded services. The other slides all show the expenses net of revenue, which is appropriate as the total amount, as that is the total amount on the tax levy. As water, wastewater, and building are self-funded services, expenses net of revenue for each of these services is actually zero. That is to say, there is no impact on the tax levy as a result of these budgets. This slide does not show revenue, it only shows the expenses for each of these areas. Both water and wastewater expenses actually show a decrease as compared to the 2020 budget. While material drivers that pushed expenses higher in water and wastewater for 2021 include the addition of a SCADA technician and parts of the costs of the salaries for the infrastructure technician and the sustainability coordinator, these cost increases were more than offset by cost reductions elsewhere in the budget, including a significant decline in the cost of biosolids disposal. While it's not on this slide, as only expenses are shown here, the pandemic has had a significant impact on building permit revenue. Revenues for 2020 will be much less than we had originally budgeted, and we anticipate that this trend will continue well into 2021. The building permit reserve is used to offset the reduction in permit revenue, and the current balance is sufficient to cover the anticipated shortfall due to the pandemic. We anticipate that permit revenue will once again exceed expenses in 2022. At that, I'll pass it back to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So Council, now we look at the financial outlook, and this is the long-term financial outlook, and this relates back to our 10-year capital planning. So we will now be looking at the financial outlook for debt level as well as the reserves level. So what I wanted to present today to you is a very uncluttered visual of what this will look like. The numbers are already provided in the budget book. Like I said, I wanted to provide to you a visual representation of the 10-year financial outlook. So we have 3 graphs on this particular slide. So the top two, the left one with the blue bars rather, shows the debt level for the next 10 years. And the one to the right with the orange bars shows the reserves level. So this is how you want to see your debt level bar chart and your reserve level bar chart to move. On the debt side, you would like to see a steady decline as we pay off our debt. On the reserve side, you would like to see a steady incline as we build our reserves. So the final graph on this slide, the one at the bottom, shows the debt to reserve ratio. Again, I wanted to show to you visually an uncluttered graph of that. So again, the orange is the reserve, the blue portion is the debt. And as you can see, for most part, the ratio is fairly optimal and equal. Now, in the outer years, 27 through 2030, the reserve levels are slightly higher, which actually is the good news, because you want your reserve level or your equity level to be slightly higher than your debt level. But like I said, and I think I made that point earlier when I was talking to the OPS OPP slide, that with any financial projection, as we go to the outer years, we have to incorporate some margin of error. Now, this is not so much for the margin of error that you're seeing this. Part of it is due to the fact that as we go toward 2027 on to 2030, we will have more projects to incorporate as we go through different iteration of our water wastewater studies, our development charges studies, strategic plan, asset management plan. But the point that I'm making, and I hope the takeaway tonight, is that financially the town of Orangeville is managing our debt level as well as our reserves level at an optimum level. And I believe the debt to reserve ratio, like I said, without numbers, gives you the uncluttered visual of that. So before I make my recommendation tonight, Council, I just would like to touch upon a couple of points. The first point is, and I spoke to this when I tabled on January 18th, we did not change our base budget for the 2021 budget deliberation or for the budget document simply because changing the base budget would only mean, changing the base budget due to COVID-19 would only mean that when COVID is over and we are coming back to a regular complement of staff or our regular service level, then there will be a sharp incline in our tax levy. Because of that, we're keeping our base budget intact. The other point I would like to make is going back to that divisional pie chart, the levy requirement by division. And once again, I would like to remind you that on January 18, and I reiterate that point tonight, is that we are providing to you an extremely lean budget. More than 90% of the divisional requirements are mandated by various legislations and other levels of government and mandates by council itself. So before I table my recommendation tonight, let's take a quick look at the net levy requirement of the consolidated budget. The numbers you're looking at is at the pre-growth level. So in 2020, pre-growth levy requirement was 36.6. In 2021, we did some one-time reversals. Inflationary impact is slightly over 200,000. There are some one-time items. Now, more details of this particular table is provided in the document itself. Service level impact is slightly over 800,000. So we are looking at a pre-growth levy requirement of 37.4 million. When we adjust, and as you can see on this table, the net levy requirement on the blue line or the blue row is pre-growth. When we adjust for our growth estimate, which is real growth, by the way, not phased in. So the real growth is 483,000, which is 1.32. So essentially with net of growth, the net levy requirement that we're asking tonight from council is 36.9 million, which is essentially $356,000 increase over last year's levy requirement. In percentage, you're looking at 0.97. So the following table is just for illustration purposes. So for every 1% in levy increase, we're approximately, by the way, these numbers, the dollar values are rounded. So for every percentage increase, you're looking at $366,000 in levy increase. So for every 0.75, we're looking at 274.50, 183, 0.25, 91,000. Once again, Council, I cannot emphasize on the fact enough that for a budget envelope of close to 65 million, which is the gross expenditure envelope, and a levy envelope closer to 36 million, a $356,000 increase in levy is probably one of the smartest budget that I have personally delivered in my 15 years career, and probably one of the smartest budget that I have seen that are going around during this pandemic. So the moment of truth, and from your treasurer, through you, your worship, to council, here's my recommendation tonight. That council approves 2021 consolidated net levy totaling 36.9 million, or 0.97%. For the self-funded portion of the budget, that council approves 2021 self-funded budget for building, water, and wastewater as presented. Before I conclude, I would like to take a moment to thank my fellow presenters, Andrea McKinney, Ray Osman, and Doug Jones. I would also like to extend my gratitude to Mr. Brennan for his leadership, to the entire global management team, to our staff for their continuous dedication and hard work to make this budget document one of the most stellar and clearly an award-winning document. So I will open the floor for a question. Back to you, Worship.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Treasurer. It was an impressive document that you put together, you and your team. And again, thank you to all the general managers and their teams, and as you said, Mr. Brennan, for pulling all this together. So, councillors, I'm just wondering whether we want to do a similar review as we did last night, or do we want to move directly to approving this budget as it sits? Councillor Sherwood, you've got your hand up, and then I've got Deputy Mayor McIntosh as well.
Andy, were you ahead of me? Do you know?
Yep. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. Just a quick question on the 140,000 for the police building. If Mr. Osman could explain, what is that for exactly? Is it regular maintenance, or is it some additional work?
Your Worship, through to Deputy Mayor McIntosh, it's for the entire operation of the building, so it includes everything from gas, hydro, janitorial, the HVAC systems, total maintenance of the envelope of the building. So there's no capital works, just strictly operations.
Thank you. Further to that, do we know what they paid last year? As far, I assume the police looked after that budget last year. Do we have any idea what they paid?
We do it, Your Worship, but we do have a budget for last year. It's in the same range of 140,000, 160,000, somewhere in that range. We had to pull things from different parts of the budget, but we have taken a look at what we're doing in our contracts and so on, and we are quite confident we can do it, $140,000 budget. And we'll wait and see, like I said earlier, we need to go through a full cycle to get a good experience on the building itself. Once we have that experience, and we'll have a better idea in 22 if we need to go any higher or lower.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I'm wondering if we could go through the document similar to last night. If we could start out at the beginning where we've removed some one-time items, we're adding some one-time items, and then address the service level impacts, and then go department by department, rather than jump all over. If we could, if everyone else is in agreement.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Treasurer, if we could roll through this again as we did last night, please. Are you able to share your screen?
Just give me a moment, Your Worship. I just have to, just give me a minute or two. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Your Worship, can you see my screen now?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Worship, I'm just waiting for your direction. I will be driving the documents, so just let me know where would you like to go first.
Can we just roll through like we did last night? Start
at administration
then?
or council and committee. Well, last night was
let's go to council and committee. Yeah, that was the starting point.
Okay. And I'm assuming you just want to go to the financial.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me, Your Worship, is the one-time removal and the service level impacts before this before these pages?
That's correct.
I would like to go up to the beginning if we could, Your Worship.
Councillor Sherwood, where would you like me to land?
That's a good start. Where you're taking the one-time removals. Anyone else can jump in if they like, but I was suggesting we start with what items you're reversing, what ones you're adding, and then, yeah, so go back up to the one-time reversals so we can just review them, and then we'll continue from here.
Okay. So are you expecting me to read this out to you, or how do you want to?
No, Your Worship, then you would ask if any of us.
Any councillors wish to ask questions, they can make themselves known.
None.
If there's no other no questions, we'll move on.
Your Worship, could I ask for some verbal cues, because when I'm sharing my screen, I don't get to see.
Yes, you can go to the next page, Madam Treasurer.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay. Any questions, councillors, on this page? Seeing none, could you move ahead, Madam Treasurer?
Your Worship, so these pages, I'm having difficulty to capture them. Like, can you see the entire page?
Yes, we've got the entire page there now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions, councillors, on this page? Okay, let's move on to the next page, please.
Sorry, I did have a question very quickly, Your Worship.
Councillor Andrews, go ahead. You're muted, sir. You're muted, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And very quickly, this would be to one of the line items there, the I guess it is pronounced SCADA technician. And I know that Mr. Jones had referenced that in his presentation. If I could just get some clarity on what the responsibility would be in that particular case.
Jones?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Andrews. I'm going to start the description of it, and I'm going to ask Mr. Hall to fill in any blanks that I may have. SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System. It is essentially the computer systems that run our water and our wastewater systems. It basically is all of the automatic controls, all of the alarming, and all of the ability to control what is happening in the system and monitor it remotely. Historically, we have not had an individual who has done this role for us. We have done our best to run it in-house with the assistance of outside consulting help as a SCADA integrator. With that assistance, we've managed to move forward. However, we've identified this as a risk area in our operations, and we believe that it's time that we brought somebody in-house to oversee this, who has the true expertise to oversee this, and ultimately we're likely to save some money on the integration side. If Mr. Hall has anything to add, I would welcome his input.
Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would concur that those are the main baseline drivers for this position. It's a very specialized solution in the industry, dealing with all the programming of all the controllers that run valves and all the nits, the little pieces that are required to make these systems work. And we're often working with integrators is difficult to get some of those solutions in place quickly. So for us, it's reducing the risk and having a liaison to help with dealing with some of those complex pieces of processes and controls with those systems.
Okay, I appreciate the response, and both Mr. Jones and Mr. Hall had indicated risk. In this case, risk mitigation is certainly very much on my list, but at the same time, could you just share very quickly what would be an example of some of the potential risks involved with this particular area of expertise? Not with the area of expertise, but the area that they would be, of course, applying their skill set.
Mr. Jones?
I may defer this to Mr. Hall. It's really more of an IT thing from a risk perspective.
Okay.
Mr. Hall?
Your Worship, to Councillor Andrews, the risk is associated with these systems are automatically changing all the different systems. So we got chemicals that are being mixed. We have controls for chlorination. All these different systems have these automation pieces, and there's a lot of complexity with that. And when you're not you don't have that in-house staff that can look at some of those problems, you can run into situations where you're forced to go into sort of a manual situation where you're running these systems manually. So that's part of the risk is associated with having to shut down some of the automation in order to control the environment. So that's definitely one area that's of concern.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the clarification, Mr. Hall. That's all I have right now, Your Worship.
Thank you. I have a question for I guess Mr. Osmond. Item 47 on this is the Tourism and Culture Officer. I'm just wondering, we know that Dufferin County has also hired a tourism officer. I'm just wondering about what the timing is here, considering we're still in COVID, we don't know when we're coming out of this, certainly from a tourism standpoint. Can you share with us, with the council, when you think to hire, when it would be appropriate to hire? I mean, is 2021 the year, or should this be pushed off? I'm just wondering. Mr. Ottawa.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, first off, not unlike my conversation last night on the capital side, the tourism we see tourism as a major driver to start off. Major driver to drive the economy and drive the business community, and also to look at what we're doing going post-COVID. And it's actually absolutely critical that we get a position as soon as possible to do the work on the branding piece, work with consultants, work with the stakeholders get to know the community, and to do all the work around developing moving the tourism strategy forward, the work plan forward, and taking all the recommendations that's in that plan and implementing those recommendations along with the rest of the staff in economic development, as well as working side by side with the BIA in terms of tourism and helping to move the agenda, if you would. As I said last evening, it's we're looking at the 21 year as a excellent year to plan, to prepare, to get ready to come out of the COVID experience, albeit the way it is. It's a matter of nothing really changes. We've gone through an area at a time when we dealt with business, got lots of feedback, and the surveys and everything else tell us that they've appreciated the support, but they're looking forward to coming out of COVID and how we're going to adapt it going into the future and what the changes are. And I think one of the biggest things happening in Ontario is that we're seeing a lot of staycations where you're staying at home and traveling within the province and staying close to your neighbors to the east and west, north and south. And Orangeville, as we see it, is a major destination. And the big thing is, how do we make it so that everybody sees it as a destination? And we don't want to find ourselves going into 22 and just starting to plan. We want to find ourselves doing the planning now, adapting now, working with all the key players now in the community, and preparing the agenda for tourism. And that staff person is critical to moving that full agenda forward. And that's how we see it. We see this year as a critical year, actually, taking the tourism plan that we just completed, doing the number one priority, number one recommendation, getting a staff person, a key player, moving the branding piece, working with the stakeholders, working with PIAs, and working with other divisions and departments within the corporation to move the tourism agenda forward and move it as quickly as possible forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate all of that, and I'm just thinking about the Orangeville taxpayer who was also picking up roughly 50% of the Dufferin County budget, and therefore tourism officer that's about to be hired by Dufferin County should be spending half their time on Orangeville. We're paying for half of it. So I just, I'm just making that point that we're going from 0 to 2 six-figure salaries in the tourism area. I'm not sold on it myself, but anyway, we can talk about that later. Any other questions from councillors on this page? Seeing none, Madam Treasurer, if you could move on to the next page.
Yes.
Very good. Okay. Mr. Osmond, I'm just looking at the Gene Hamlin line. You've got 7750 there. Is that all you're expecting after the renovations going forward for this year?
Thank you, Your Worship. As you know, the contract and agreement with the YMCA to operate that building is minimal on our part. These are for the major work that could happen with the actual structure, particularly around the electrical mechanical system in the building. Otherwise, we don't do any maintenance, no janitorial, no services to the building at all, unless it's something to do major with a roof or something like that, and they'll be end up coming back in capital. But they just did the roof before we took the building over. So we see minimal cost to the town in servicing that building.
If you wouldn't mind just refreshing myself, council, and the public, what is the revenue, the gross revenue that we're taking in from rental from YMCA?
Gross revenue, if my memory serves me correctly, around $100,000 a year is the revenue for that building.
And they're looking after the utility costs on top of that?
That's correct.
Very good. All right, councillors, got Councillor Sherwood and then Councillor Andrews. Councillor Sherwood, right ahead.
Yes, Your Worship. through you to Mr. Osmond. Regarding item number 71, the Tillsonburg Communications Dispatch is showing an expense of $69,000, but I believe having gone from paying those services to OPS, did we not get a substantial savings back? Because I thought we paid them considerably more.
Sure.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Sherwood, you're correct. The 69,000 you're seeing is the net, is our cost. The savings is the price we were paying, or cost we were paying OPS is roughly $120,000. So the rest would be savings. So that's the cost to the directly to the town, 69,000. You'll see that in the budget.
The savings is shown somewhere else. So we're saving.
Yep.
Your Worship, if I.
Yes, go ahead, Madam Treasurer.
So as we are going through the service level impact, one of the things that we should focus on in the positive as well as the negative numbers. So if you look at sort of the bottom of the screen, we are showing sort of an aggregate OPS reduction, right? So clearly this is an aggregate reduction. So even though there's a $69,000 Tillsonburg Communication Dispatch Services, to Mr. Osmond's point, it's actually a reduction from what the cost was under the OPS's budget. And more of that you will see as we go through divisional budget, but I just wanted to point that out to council collectively, that as you're looking through this, you will see that some of the line items has offsetting numbers as well.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Mr. Osmond, a question for you as well. This would be line item number 57, the Alder Pool closed for 6 months, added to the Tony Rose net impact. If you could just provide some explanation, and I have somewhat of I guess, a related question, which would be, if COVID had not hit, I know that the Alder Pool would have had to be closed regardless. Would that same number exist that is presented in this particular page?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Andrews, absolutely, it would probably maybe be a little bit more depending on how our year went, but we did have some revenue. We were taking in some revenue. If the building shut down, and right now we're looking at a shutdown to way into the summer, so we would see a reduction in the Alder revenues. We're operating now in the aquatics world, all total roughly around 30% of our revenue that we normally would take in.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, councillors, we'll move on to the next page. Yes, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Jones. So my understanding is I see now we are, you're requesting a sustainability coordinator, I see being divided amongst different divisions. So that position is no longer being funded by any of the grants that we had previously. You're now wanting them to come on board full-time off contract?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Sherwood, that's correct, essentially. We had funding from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities for a climate change coordinator for 2 years. That funding is expiring in 2021. The intent is to bring the individual on full-time as a sustainability coordinator to continue the work that has begun on the climate adaptation plan and to look at a climate mitigation plan to help the town meet its commitments under the Partners for Climate Change program and the GCOM, as well as to spearhead the implementation of the Sustainable Neighborhood Action Plan.
Just to follow up, Your Worship, so I'm assuming, Mr. Jones, that you're displaying like a full year salary, but by the sounds of it, we're likely to receive some funding still in this year towards that salary.
My understanding is that the funding expires at the end of February, so we will receive 2 months of funding toward the position this year.
I just want to make a comment. One of the other hats I wear is Chair of Infrastructure, Services and Environment for Dufferin County, for the committee. And I was talking with Scott Burns, Public Works Director of the county, last week. And we talked about their sustainability coordinator, Sarah Wicks. Mr. Burns reported that Ms. Wicks has been very active in securing grants, and in fact has recouped a good chunk of her wage. So I can only offer that up to our department, and hopefully our sustainability coordinator can also search out those types of grants that the town might be available, or might be available to the town. All right, any other questions here, councillors? Okay, let's move on.
So that brings us to the end of the service level impacts. I'm going to go back to the table of contents, Your Worship, and if you want, I can start with council and committee.
Thank you.
Your Worship, can I make a quick point as we're going through these summaries? Your Worship?
Yes, go right ahead, Madam.
Okay, thank you. So as we're going through these pages, Council, just want to bring to your attention that we have provided material drivers. So the word material means substantial, something that is material from an accounting purposes. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a budget document. It is a financial document. And at the, and it's subject to audit at the year end. So material is more material from an accounting perspective, not from a social perspective. So I just want to make that point.
Any questions here, councillors? Seeing none, can we move on, please? All right. Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead, Madam Judge.
So Your Worship, one other thing is some of these division will have multiple pages. So do you mind if I just quickly scroll through them so that council can see because for me to land on page 1 is not the whole story, right?
No. Well, I think, can you stop there? Can you stop at page 2? Let's just have a quick look there.
Page 2?
Yeah.
You mean 29?
I'm sorry, page 29, yes.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. So I am going to go to the Police Service Board. This has been added to the committees. I see that. I'm a little troubled about the increase, and I'm sure I'll get a good explanation. Professional fees, I understand, would be confidential matters, but they've gone to 155,000 versus 55. But I think the biggest thing I'm trying to understand is compensation. By my calculation, the 5 board members, their honorarium works out to a little over $19,000 a year. And with the Police Services Board secretary fee, that comes out to about $35,000 in honorariums. And I do know that the Police Service Board members do get extra pay for extra meetings, but I would kind of like an explanation as to the requirement of over another $50,000 in compensation for the 5-member board.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Sherwood, so the balance of that budget for compensation pertains to retirement benefits, which is, by the way, it's one of those items that I cannot go any further than what I'm explaining right now because it relates to personnel. At this point, if the chair or Councillor Taylor would like to add anything further to that, I would defer that to him.
Do you mind if I just have a quick follow-up first?
Sure.
If it's relating to benefits for employees or past employees, why is it falling under police and not under our regular organizational benefits and pension? Why does it have to fall under the Police Service Board?
Again, through your worship to Councillor Sherwood, I think this is something that the town has historically carried that way. Mind you, Councillor Sherwood, it is the same ratepayer and the same budget. I mean, even when the Police Services Board was under OPS, it was the same budget. So, but historically, and I only joined the town in 2019, but what my understanding would be, historically, this has been part of PSB's budget. I do have our deputy treasurer who does have a couple of years over, more than me with this town. So Faye West, if you're with us, can you just confirm what I just said to Councillor Sherwood?
That would be correct, Madam Treasurer.
Your Worship, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Sherwood, I too have found that compensation line strange, and I know the mayor has found that strange too, and so we have spent time in our PSB meetings talking about what does constitute that. And you're right, it's the Police Services Board salaries, including the secretary. And then just to expand on what the treasurer has said, there is individuals in that bucket who used to work for the town and who are now retirees, and they make up the lion's share of that compensation line that's there. It's quite odd that it would be there, but then again, I don't know where you'd put it. It has to go somewhere, but you can't divide it up because you'd be giving away confidential information about those individuals that are in there. But if I may, the math you did on the salaries for the PSB members is accurate. I mean, you have that information, so you could do the math and figure that out. But who the people are in there and what they receive each year, I think that'd be confidential.
Right, and thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. So what I'm saying is, for it to look better, I know we have to pay that money out, and I'm okay with that. It would be a better reflection of the Police Services Board under committees if anything related to past employees fell within the Town of Orangeville employee bucket and benefit package. I realize it's a shift from one pot to the other, but it would definitely make your budget reflect a little bit more normal.
Councillor Sherwood, the Police Service Board is a separate entity from the town, and everybody in that bucket was a employee of the Police Service Board, not of the town of Orangeville. I think that's the distinction. Councillor Taylor, can you confirm?
Yes, Your Worship, and I'll speak in, I guess, a bit of code, but Your Worship, that would be accurate with the exception of we did find one error this year, and it was yourself, me, and Member McSweeney who found that, and that member has been moved to the appropriate bucket. So on balance, exactly what the mayor has said is correct, and we have combed this and tried to ensure that it's accurate, and I believe it is. If you didn't have any other questions on that, I do want to answer your legal question too, but I'll turn it back to Your Worship and wait for instruction.
If you'd like, I know it's a delicate situation, so if you wish to speak to it, Councillor Taylor, we're ready to.
I would like to speak to it, and I think we're 2 and a bit years in, and so it's still okay to admit that you don't love the system with what you work in, and that is, I think it bothers me greatly, and I don't want to speak for you, Mayor Brown, but I know it bothers you, that at times we cannot be transparent about certain items, and there is ongoing legal issues associated with things that the police do, and I don't want you to reach it to just police officers. There would be things that the board becomes involved in that would require legal representation. And the sad thing is my learnings on the police board over the 2 and a bit years that I've been involved in it, I've talked to more lawyers in my 2.5 years on the police board than I have on my 50 years on the planet. So it's been a great learning experience and a frustrating one, but this is where we are at. The police board spent time consulting with the treasurer, not about the items that are in that legal expense, but just generally about what those legal expenses can be. And if we can, fellow councillors, at the end of the year, I would be more than pleased to turn back a portion of those monies that are allocated there. But I think my fear is at this point, they could be greater than that. And if you search your knowledge of what's going on in the police, you'd be able to piece together some of what I'm saying.
Right. And if I may, Councillor Taylor, I think that we want to let the public know and councillors know that there's been a transition from a Section 31 Police Services Board, which is what local police forces operate or boards operate under the rules of the Police Services Act, and we're moved down into a Section 10 Police Services Board. Councillor Taylor, as the chair of the PSB, invited the chair of Midland Police Services to come to one of our meetings in the fall, and he explained to us what the future holds for a police service board under Section 10, and it turns out that things get fairly quiet fairly quickly. So on the legal matters, that has been a problem for the police service board under Section 31. The light at the end of the tunnel is that legal issues are going to be minimal going forward, and we have to get through this difficult transition right now, but I would expect by the end of 2021 things are going to look a lot different, and meetings will not have to be as I guess interesting in a bad way going forward. Is that safe to say, Chair Taylor?
I would agree with that in principle, Your Worship. The one thing I think that council and the public should know is that the OPP has legal issues as well as the OPS did. It's just, to Your Worship's point, the difference between the two boards and the sections. The OPP would look after those legal issues on their own, and under the board that we had previously, our Orangeville Police Services Board looked after those legal issues. So there will be diminishing responsibility and therefore diminishing legal fees. We will still need a smaller budget of legal fees, but not to the size that we have here. And while we're in public, at some point, and I would need to get this passed by the Police Services Board, but it's certainly my wish. I would like to come at some point to council, and I think I'm on thin water because I just need to make sure that I'm doing things from a legal fashion, but I'd like to come to council in a closed session and share what we can about those legal issues. And to the public who's disappointed in my comments tonight, you just can't talk about a legal strategy in the public. It's just not something that you can do. And so council, if we can do that on some of these ongoing issues, I certainly would like to, because it's an odd situation for sure. Okay,
that's good. Transparency is good, and we'd be looking forward to hearing more about these matters here at the council table. Thanks, Councillor Taylor. Okay, let's move on, Madam Treasurer.
So, Your Worship, that brings us to the end of committees. I mean, this is just the material drivers page. So the next one is administration, which is essentially the CAO's division. So I'll park there for a moment.
Your Worship, if I may,
Councillor Taylor.
I just wanted to make the comment. I do find the silence awkward and deafening here tonight as we go through it. This will be one of the more awkward council meetings I'm finding in terms of the way we're doing this. I think the suggestion by Councillor Sherwood to do it in this way is absolutely appropriate. And my silence tonight, and I'm assuming the silence of my co-workers, co-council members, is because the budget is done in such a strong way. I think we feel all mandated to go through it in this fashion, but it's a very quick exercise. And I guess I just wanted to explain why I'm quiet tonight, and I assume my other members are as well. I don't speak for them, but it's just a really well done document. So there's minimal discussion required.
I agree.
Agreed. All right. Councillor Sherwood, I see your hand up there.
I think I might have missed something, Your Worship. Would you be able to go back to page 29, please, Madam Treasurer? No, I've obviously written down the wrong. No, it's page 39. Sorry, we haven't got there yet. My apologies.
Right.
Okay. Your Worship, what's the direction? Do you want me to go back to CEO's position?
Your Worship?
Yeah. Is that Deputy Mayor?
Yes. I had one last question about the Police Services Board, and I apologize. I do have my name on the list, but maybe you didn't see it.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor.
No problem. I just didn't want you to call me up 20 minutes from now. My question is, these legal fees, I don't care what they are, but are they related to the transfer to OPP? Can we at least be told that?
Are they related to the transfer of the OPP? It's a bland question. I would say no, if that's...
I would know as well, knowing some of this information. I think it's a no, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, and the reason I was asking if that money should be put in that other budget that we had for the transfer over.
Yeah.
But that's fine. If it's not related to that, then I just find it ironic. I'm on the Hydro Board and we have 7 members and our budget is below 100,000, and yet this budget is with 5 members is as high as it is. I just we're supposed to pay this. You know, the taxpayers are supposed to pay for this, but they don't know what they're paying for, and we don't know what we're paying for. So it just leaves a bad taste. I understand it, I really do, but it just leaves a bad taste. Thank you.
Your Worship, if I may.
Councillor Taylor, you wish to speak?
I would, and just to understand your question, Deputy Mayor, is your bad taste in reference to the legal fees line or to the entire budget, or what? Could you be more specific?
Well, the increase leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And I assume that's mainly legal fees.
Without transparency for that number, is that what you're saying? Yeah. Well, like Councillor Taylor said, unfortunately, with legal matters, they're sequestered until such time as we can release them. But right now,
it just makes my decision I made a year ago more relevant. But thank you.
Your Worship, if I may, is it okay, Your Worship? Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Yeah. If you look forward in future years, 24, 25, there's still contingency in there, and whether that's the right contingency, it might be a touch low, but by a touch low, 5 or 10,000 touch low kind of thing. Like it drops off considerably.
Yeah, no, I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, Madam Treasurer, let's move on to the next page. Yeah.
I'm assuming the next page is page 32, Your Worship?
Yes.
Okay.
So there's little impact here. Councillors, are we okay on this page? Seeing no questions, let's move on.
Okay, I'll go to the table of content. And let's go to corporate allocations.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes. Councillor Peters.
Yes, through to you to the Treasurer, just for clarity. So the grant line for 80,000, that's the community grants that we look at annually?
Through Your Worship to the Councillor, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And for the public, Madam Treasurer, could you just comment on PILs, what that top line is there?
Okay, so PIL, Your Worship, is payment in lieu of taxes. So these are tax payments from Crown corporations, so any properties that are owned by federal and provincial government. So they don't really pay us taxes, they pay us payment in lieu of taxes.
Very good. Councillor Taylor, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The only thing I wanted to mention, and Grant brings up the grant line in a great way. Kind of two questions. One is, I see that, you know, we're holding firm to prior year, and yet we haven't agreed on who would be in that. I imagine, is that a debate that we do at a later date, or did you just allocate, you know, there's probably 16 different community groups in there. Are they already allocated for, or how did we, maybe you could just refresh my memory through you to the Treasurer, Your Worship.
Treasurer.
Through you to Councillor Taylor. So first and foremost, yes, I am leaving that as is, simply because, as I've mentioned earlier, we are not changing the base budget, and 80,000 has been the base budget. In terms of allocation, a separate report, very similar to what I've done in the last year, a separate report will come to Council with all the applications that are coming in. At that point, Council will have the opportunity to deliberate and award the grants as Council see fit.
Thank you.
I've got one question on the insurance line, Madam Treasurer.
Yep.
So you had in our approved budget in 2020 $410,000. We're up over 20% in 2021. Can you speak to that? Is this something that all municipal governments have faced? And is there a particular reason that you could put your finger on? Have the insurance companies given you a reason?
Absolutely. Thank you, Worship, for that question. So, Worship, what I would say is this increase was coming, actually, this is 2 years in making. So for 2020, I would say the number we were provided by the insurance company was on the low end, because insurance companies have gone through some industry level changes last year, and this was the whole thing started pre-COVID-19. COVID-19 just increased that pressure. So I realized that it looks like 2020 was on the low end, but in fact, some of the increases that were not factored in 2020 actually came back in 2021. And this is not just for or unique to town of Orangeville. I would say there are other municipalities, and I'm not going to name them right now, but to west of us, actually where I live in the City of London, and some of the northern municipalities have seen way higher increases than what we are experiencing. So this is more a reaction to what's happening in the industry as opposed to unique to the town of Orangeville.
And this isn't the entire insurance cost for the town. This is parsed out amongst the departments. Is that correct, Madam Chair?
That's absolutely correct. So this portion is something that pertains to the corporation. So since I have the mic right now, if Your Worship, if I can just elaborate a little bit on this particular division. So corporate allocation is it's sort of a standalone division. So any line items, may that be revenue or expenditure, that that impacts the entire organization, and B, things that we cannot fit in somewhere else. So for example, you previously asked me about PIL, which is the payment in lieu of taxes. So something like that doesn't belong to any other division. So this is kind of a catch-all division for everything. So to answer your question more specifically, yes, there are other insurance line items that are spread out over the 17 divisions.
Very good, thank you. Yeah, just one other item I wanted to point out on this page to the public. The investment in ORDC, you can see the line item in the middle of the page there, 389,400. So this council is pursuing the sale of the rail line. People who have been watching this in the news realize that the organization that runs the rail line, which is OBRAG, in partnership with the operator of the rail line, has given us a letter telling us that they're going to terminate the agreement and no longer run the freight rail service as of December 31st, 2021. So although it's being carried forward in 2022, 23, 24 on this spreadsheet. In all likelihood, that line item is going to be disappearing in the not too distant future. So I just want to make that comment, pending, of course, the sale of the line. All right, moving along, Madam Treasurer.
Okay, so the next one is police. So, Your Worship, if I may just give a brief overview here, because police divisional budget is slightly different this year because this is the first year of the transition. So what we have done is we have shown on page 39, where I'm sort of landing right now, what would have been OPS's budget in a multi-year versus what is OPP's budget in 2019. So I just want to make that point for those who are looking at this and who are sort of listening in.
Okay.
So where do you want me to land, Your Worship? Which page?
I just, if you could go back and try and capture the whole thing. Is there any way you can make your screen larger rather than having the superfluous stuff on the sides there? Is it?
Your Worship, larger in terms of, I mean, I cannot capture more.
Is there a way to share this so that we're just looking at the sheet, not the background?
Yeah, there is.
You go to the three little buttons and you click on, you'll see focus. And if you press focus, it'll get larger.
Top right you're talking about?
Where you see your camera and the mute button, the share button, then there's three little buttons called more actions. You click on the more actions and you'll see a line called focus. And
Your Worship, I will try my best to focus. I have been focusing.
Three dots, the bar at the bottom there.
Yes, Your Worship. I'm having difficulty finding the focus button. And
move down and highlight the bar at the bottom.
Yes, I found the three dots, Your Worship. I'm just, I did open the menu. Your Worship, what I'll try to do is, again, I don't want to be, so let's see if I can.
Can you close the stuff on the side that says create PDF and all of that? Can you close that out?
You can if you press that little arrow. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, that's better, I think.
That's better?
Yeah, I think so. So if you could move up just a touch there, Madam. Oh, there you go.
There we go. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, if you could hold right there, just so we can have a look through.
I have a question, Your Worship.
Yes, Councillor Sherwood, go ahead.
Okay, so if we look at page 39 under the OPS, grants was 1.239 million. But if you go down to the OPP, the grants are 800, or it says user fees, sorry.
Yeah.
User fees are 800,000. Are we still capable of recovering those 400,000? And I guess it shifted from grants to, I'm just wondering what happened to the grants, that's all.
Okay. So through your worship, to Councillor Sherwood, as I was going through the slides, one of the things I indicated that due to COVID-19, there are uncertainties around some of the grants we typically got. And this is happening irrespective of whether we were with OPS or OPP, right? Provincial governments are looking at their budget book, and there are uncertainties around 1,000 officers, court securities, and so on. So the user fees is slightly misleading here. We did incorporate some grant monies into this larger bucket, but we have budgeted extremely conservatively for OPP when it comes to grants, given that there are uncertainty around it. Now, we will have a much better idea post 2021 and post COVID-19 how this is going to look in a post-COVID world, because most of court hearings have now moved to a virtual platform, and therefore there are some impact as to how much grant OPP will receive to that end. So again, given that there are uncertainties around it, the approach we took, and it's a collective approach, and this is not just an approach that the town of Orangeville took, that this is impacting other municipalities too. If there are if there are uncertainties around provincial grants, it impacts all other municipalities. So the collective approach is to budget very conservatively when it comes to any grant money, at least for this year.
Okay, very good. I also want to make a comment. One of the, I guess, silver linings in the transition from OPS to OPP is that the town has hired on former Sergeant Mary Lou Archer. My understanding is that she's been doing an excellent job in assisting with the transition, and she's quite knowledgeable about the grant funding, and will be able to assist the town and OPP going forward in that area. So hats off to Mary Lou Archer, our new town employee out of OPS. All right.
Your Worship?
On to the next. Yes, I'm sorry, Councillor Taylor.
I am punching the little button here to get into our e-scribe.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. I'm not seeing it come up here, unfortunately.
No problem, just trying to be respectful and follow the process. I wanted to comment, if I could, on the grants as well, and offer some additional feedback to what our good treasurer has been saying, that the big grant that's out there right now is the Court Security Prisoner Transportation Grant. And there's really a couple of different hurdles that are going to be undertaken over the next period of time. The first one is February 21st, and we'll determine whether or not we get some grant money from that. And then the next one is in March. And what the province is doing is just trying to decide whether or not they want to continue to give this level of funding. And why it's important to us is in 2018, the town of Orangeville got $940,000. And in 2019, we got just over $1 million. So you move forward to 21, it's around $1.2 million that's up in the air potentially. And the province is reviewing this. So there could be an issue for municipalities moving forward. But it was put to me today when I was speaking to members of the province who were affiliated with this that, AMO would have an absolute fit if that was the case and this funding was cut, and there would be high political ramifications for those who are in power with the province. So the thinking is that a year out from a provincial election, the probability of the 21 and 22 funding for this significant grant being given to us or taken away is very low. So I think we can all take that aside with some confidence, knowing that there is risk, and the treasurer is absolutely correct, but the probability of it transpiring is low.
Thank you for that, Councillor Taylor. All right, shall we move on to the next page, Madam Treasurer?
Your Worship, if I may.
Go ahead, Councillor Taylor.
As a follow-up, I'd also like to talk. Are we off of the police now? We're going on to corporate service.
Yeah.
So before we leave the police, I'd like to talk about that budget myself, if I could. And with your permission, I'd like to share my screen.
I think we'd like to keep on target here. I don't think we're really talking about history here, Chair Taylor. What is specifically do you want to talk about, sir?
I want to talk about the budget this year that we've been given on the police, and that police budget, although less than what was predicted for the OPS if we had stayed, it is $800,000 more than what the consultant had predicted a year ago. And I went and I did the data, and for what the consultant predicted,
I don't think this is the time to be talking about
it is the time, Your Worship. This is a police time, and we're talking about a budget. And I think
what you're trying to do here is some political grandstanding, and this isn't the time.
I would suggest that it's the same for you, Your Worship. We are $6 million over what the consultant said on our policing. And I think that the public deserves to know.
This isn't the time for this.
When would be the time, Your Worship? When would we talk?
Perhaps we'd like to put a motion forward to bring this up at another council meeting, but not
outside of a budget meeting. Why would we talk about it outside of a budget meeting?
Because what you're talking about is not going to change what has been put in front of us. That's why.
Well, it may, because there is grant money that is being added here to come up with a budget number for 21 through 24. And that is much higher than what we were told 12 months ago.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to suggest that we do not go down this path tonight, Chair Taylor, or Councillor Taylor. You'll have ample opportunity. In fact, on February the 8th, Mr. Brennan is going to give a recap on where we are with the transition, and I would suggest that would be the appropriate time to do that.
That's fine. So, I just think it's an absolute shame that we're in the situation that we're in.
Well, I can tell you at this point, our budget for policing is lower than it was last year. We're in a good shape. We're in a good shape. And
12% higher than was promised to the citizens of Orangeville.
Fair enough, but I'm very interested to hear your spreadsheet, and you can talk to this matter, and I would suggest you add yourself to the agenda on February 8th, Chair, Councillor Taylor. All right, Madam Treasurer, can we move on to the next item, please?
Okay, Your Worship. So the next item would be corporate services. And corporate services is essentially broken down into 5 divisions. So I'll start with finance, Your Worship.
Thank you. Madam Treasurer, could you move down to the material drivers just a little bit further down the page? Right, so public can see.
Absolutely.
We're actually improved here on our budget from last year by $751.
That's correct.
Councillors on this page? Seeing none, let's move along, Madam Treasurer. Could you hold there for a moment, please? Sorry. Sure. I'm wondering if we could have a comment on the increase in compensation there, from somebody who could speak to that. I know there's been some staff come over from OPS, for instance, and I know that council has asked for improvement digitization and in filing, and there are some contract people. I'm wondering who would like to speak to that. Ms. McKinney, perhaps?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you, and then certainly the clerk can jump in if she'd like to add. What you see in the compensation is that it does increase and then it does taper back off in the outer years. We have added contract resources and records management, and that is for, as I indicated in my introduction, the continued categorization, itemization, and ultimately the digitization of records. And the staff responsible for the town's records will be funded out of reserves. There is also an ask for the OPS records that were transitioned to the town. We are effectively the holder of those records on behalf of the PSB, and those records also need to be categorized and then digitized where appropriate. And so there is an ask there. They will also support the FOI work. And then there are some additional costs as it relates to the AA. The position is spread across each of the teams in a prorated capacity. And those are the major drivers from the compensation components, in addition to inflationary increases. Madam Clerk, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
The only thing that I will add to that is, coupled with that, is dedicating some of those resources to records then allows for time with our bylaw staff and with the deputy clerk and myself to work on those regulatory bylaws that we've developed the work plan for.
Very good. Also, for the public's notice, we do have additional bylaw enforcement staff. We don't know what the exact number is, but there is some revenue generation that's going to occur through ticketing that happens through bylaw enforcement. So, you know, that will be reflected in the future.
Your worship, would that not fall under the bylaws department, not clerks?
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Councillor Sherwood, fair enough, but it's sort of within the clerk's purview by law enforcement. So let's move on then. Could you just look at the material drivers there quickly? And then, so some of this extra expense has been offset by other savings. And again, the clerk's department has had a very small increase in tax levy there. Okay, next page, please.
So the next is bylaw, and to just a moment. So bylaw is a subdivision of the clerks.
Again, there has been transition of OPS employee into the clerk's department. But it's a good thing, as I said earlier. Law enforcement in an area that we've been short for many years, and this council is supporting increasing law enforcement, and that we have done. So there's a cost to that, but there will be some offset. Okay, can you move to the next page, please? And very little impact on the tax levy. Councilors, any questions on bylaw or clerks before we move on?
None.
Okay, moving on. Madam Treasurer?
Yes. So the next stop is information technology, and I'm just gonna go like this so that you can see the material drivers as well.
Yes.
So the overall impact is, and maybe that's the first place to go to, Your Worship, if I may, because if you look at the overall impact, it's a $3,000 increase. But I'll land here so that you can see the much bigger picture.
I have one question. I know I'll ask Mr. Hall this question. I believe there was one of your staff that was a good part of their hours was spent with OPS and their information technology. So I presume that person's been taken back and redeployed in some other area. Can you speak to that, Mr. Hall?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I can speak to that. Obviously, with the disbandment in October, we utilized that staff members more so in the other departments. IT has experienced quite a bit of growth over the last couple of years, so we've retooled those folks to assist more in the corporate side of the business space.
Very good, thank you. Councillor, any questions on this page?
None.
Let's move on.
So the last, sorry, Your Worship, go ahead.
Yeah, human resources is next.
Yes. Your Worship, should I go to the driver page and then come back up? Yeah. So the overall impact is an increase of slightly below 3,000.
Very good. Councillors, do you have any questions on this page?
None.
Seeing none, let's move on.
Okay, so the last division for corporate services is communications, and it is the smallest budget. And the overall increase is $836, Your Worship. I should say the overall impact, not increase, sorry.
Any questions, councillors? Moving on, let's move on.
Okay, so that concludes corporate services. We We now move on to community services, starting with Orangeville Fire. Okay, we'll land here.
Can you look at the material drivers there?
Yeah, we're looking at a $9,000 impact overall.
We did talk about the outside services at $69,000. That was the contract with Tillsonburg Fire to provide dispatching services. You say up there reallocation 127,873. Was that the charge back from OPS for dispatch services last year?
That's correct. So earlier when I was explaining that when you were looking at the 69,000, you were not seeing the offsetting number. This is where the offsetting is happening.
Okay, councillors, any questions on this?
I do have a quick question, Your Worship.
Yes, Councillor Andrews.
Great, thank you. Madam Treasurer, if you could just go back to page 78. I know that we have the material drivers there that provide some clarification. Again, that clarification is really, really helpful. This is just pertaining to the compensation under fire services, and I guess this would be posed to Mr. Osman. In this particular case, this would be regarding the current agreement and any COLA that would be applied. Is that correct?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Andrews, that is correct, and there's also a small adjustment in the GM was spread out over 5 divisions, or a small piece of that was picked up as well in fire. So that'll be a grand total.
Great, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Osman. Thank you.
Mr. Osman, could you also just explain to the public, I think in the fire contract, there are some rate category increases that happen along the way as well. So it's not just COLA, but there's also, in some cases, a tenured fire department person would move into a new rate category on the pay grade. Is that correct?
Your Worship, that's correct. There's several clauses in the contract, but maybe what you're referring to is that as firefighters, suppression firefighters, and captains get experience, and they change their experience pay for years of service. So that's how that works, and there's a formula for that under the contract, and that's all included in the compensation level.
Okay, so that 4.8 would include COLA within the contract plus these rate category changes that occur.
The contract in the case of the fire contract, that union contract, of course, those formulas have been set for 5 years, so it's a 5-year contract. So those percentages are different each year. They're not necessarily based on COLA. They're not actually based on COLA. They're based on a contract that's negotiated. So it would fluctuate from year to year, but these numbers are based on the contract.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, any further questions on the fire department?
Okay, so next is Orangeville Public Library, and then we'll move to Crossing Guard underneath that. Okay.
What? You liked every video that I made.
Could you maybe go to the material drivers there for us?
Absolutely. So the overall impact is a little over 14,000.
Okay. Any questions, councillors? Did I see Councillor Sherwood with a hand up?
Yeah. Madam Treasurer, if you go back down to the material drivers again.
Yeah.
Could you put your screen down just a little bit, because I want to see the screen above. Sorry, go down so that we can see a bit of the preceding. Okay, now I've gone down a little bit too far. Okay, so see how you say the total library levy impact is 114,350, but when you go to the material drivers, you say the difference is only 14,541, but in actual fact, the increase is still 114,350. Why are you referencing that the difference is only 14,000?
Okay, so through your worship to Councillor Sherwood. So this is the levy requirement of 114,000. Material drivers, as I have explained earlier in my presentation, are line items that are material from an accounting perspective. So when I'm saying impact, I am focusing on material impact on the overall budget, not so much the levy impact that is required.
So in other words, in the levy impact, there may be an increase due to increased hydro rates, for example, and that's not being taken in consideration in the material drivers, but it is part of an increase to the budget, correct? Is that
Absolutely.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Absolutely, and I absolutely do not wish to confuse anybody, but the point of a material driver graph is to show you when you're looking at the overall budget, yes, so this is the levy requirement. These are the items that are financially material from an accounting perspective.
Thank you. I was just more getting clarification as you were going through each department. It made it seem like that was just all that was levy increase, but thank you for your explanation.
No problem.
Okay, councillors, any further questions on library? Seeing none, let's go on.
So we'll go to crossing guards after this. Actually, let me go back up.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councillor Peters.
Thank you. Through you, I completely support the logic that's gone into the budget in terms of the COVID preparations, but I'll be honest, this line item is one where the logic seems to break down for me. We're well into 2021, and we know there's probably at least 10% of this number that could be reallocated, and I'll bring up the conversation last night about the tree planting, for example. So rather, I guess I would propose that rather than charge crossing guards in full and then add an item for the tree planting, for example, if we know crossing guards is only going to be 90% this year, again, as a maximum, we've lost 10% of the cumulative school year. In the interest of a zero change to the levy, I certainly think this is a line item that could be manipulated in that way. And I don't think it's going to cause any confusion next year when we come back and say, we have to go back to, a full year's numbers.
Your Worship, can I?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so as I was explaining earlier, Councillor Peters, is that, and again, this is a very simple budget, right? So the main item is the compensation line. The problem with this is if I change this number and I try to bring it back up next year, what you will see it here, or whatever the percentage line is, you will see sort of 100% change in that bucket. And then in the overall levy, this will look like an increase in levy. So one of the things that we're proposing and we're doing, and I do agree with you, that some of these fundings can be reallocated within a larger bucket of the budget. So instead of changing line items to a particular division, one of the things we can do is, as we go through the year, and clearly we as in the finance division bring a variance report throughout the year, at least 4 times a year. So as we go through our variances throughout the year, that would be an appropriate time for council to look at the variance, budget to actual, and say, we are trending well or we are not trending well, and how can we reallocate some of this funding? So through your worship, and very respectfully to Councillor Peters, I wouldn't recommend changing base budget.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can appreciate the approach, but I'm not sure what we're afraid of and why listing a change is going to cause any concern in the future. I mean, we all know what this year has brought in terms of unpredictability, and I just think if we have some room here to use a portion of this that we know will be unused, consistency in future years of what that percent change looks like is just a number on a page. It's not $1 on the tax bill. Whereas if we keep this full amount and add any line items to it, to the levy, then we are changing the net amount on someone's tax bill.
Through your worship to Councillor Peters, if I may. It will be, if I make this, let's say $352,000 zero this year, and we bring it up to full complement next year, it will be roughly a percentage increase to our levy, because we made this zero and we made the base budget for this division zero. So the point I'm making is, if we leave our base budget and any variance, any savings, any positive variance that results out of it throughout the year, council can reallocate that funding towards other things while making sure the base budget is not impacted.
I understand, and I wouldn't suggest taking this to zero. I just think if we had a one-time item that we knew was equivalent to the savings on an item such as this, that it's essentially a wash on the tax bill, and rather than keeping this at 100 and then adding a $30,000 item, for example, that will add to the 0.97 you presented earlier. So in the interest of keeping that number the same, I was sort of proposing a switch in here. But I understand the approach. I'm not, it's obviously going to stay the way it is. I don't think we need to be afraid of material change in 2021 for a line item where we understand the impacts from previous years.
Okay, I'm just wondering, Councillor Peters, if you could keep your powder dry on that particular item, maybe at the end of the evening, if we can encapsulate all this, and maybe we'll bring that up at that point. Would that be okay?
Certainly.
Your worship.
Yes, Mr. Brennan.
Your worship, I just wanted to comment another way of, I guess, of handling Councillor Peters' request is, if you want to put forward $30,000, it may be just as easy to budget it from capital reserves. And at the end of the year, as the variance comes in, and if there's any in-year savings, in which there will be, then we repay that capital allotment by transferring it into reserves. And I think it would be probably cleaner that way than trying to pick parts of a base budget and using it for something otherwise.
Okay.
Just for thought.
Thank you. All right, Madam Treasurer, can we move along, please?
Absolutely, sir. Next up is economic development.
So this budget includes the new tourism and culture officer, I see. Right. Okay.
That's correct.
Oh my God, the iPad's dead.
Your worship, are
Yes.
we?
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Sherwood.
Am I up, or did Grant? Did you queue in before me?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, my system isn't registering right now, so we'll have to go with hand signals. Sorry.
Grant, go ahead. I think you put your hand up first. Go ahead.
Okay.
Then
Questions actually for you, Mr. Mayor. Earlier in your conversation about the cultural officer, and maybe this comes back to the end, like you said, but were you proposing a different amount of FTE for that in combination with the county, or?
It was a thought, Councillor Peters. I think we all want to push the tourism angle. I think that Orangeville is, can be a day trip destination for Southern Ontario and the GTA particularly, and I think we need to work on that. I'm just wondering when the right time to do it is, and Mr. Osmond has suggested that this is a good time to plan these things, but I don't know whether, a mid-year hire would give us a little bit of deferral of this expense. That was my broad stroke kind of conversation. I see Mr. Brennan's got his hand up. Do you want to respond, Mr. Brennan?
Yeah, Your Worship. I just wanted to comment that, and to echo what Mr. Osmond said earlier, and our treasurer, this is a pretty bare bones budget overall. Actually, our organization in totality is not that large for the size of the budget and our organization that we run. What we've asked for in the form of staffing increases, again, it's really the minimal. We don't have a lot of redundancy in our organization, and what we've asked for is positions to protect us, to eliminate risk, and to fulfill the requirements and the direction of council. We've just went through the SDR project with the county. We've just got a master plan for a tourism study. We've heard loud and clear the recommendations that were in that. We hear from our BIA and our business owners in the downtown, BDAC, that we need to build tourism. We need to bring people to our downtown. And as Mr. Osmond quite well spoken put, that this is the time to start planning and put these things in place. I know it may not seem as, some may not say it's as important as a water technician or sort of maybe the SCADA technician, but you know, from a town and building a community, I think it is important. And if we want to move forward on some of these fronts, we need the staff to do it. Elsewise, we just can't move forward on it. That's what I just want you to consider that as you make your decisions tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess in hindsight, as somebody who sat on Dufferin County Council and passed a budget that included tourism officer, I didn't bring up this point at that council meeting, and perhaps I should have, but you know, here we are, these silos of money that are being spent, and I just hope that there's some synergy, and if those two officers that get hired are going to work closely together. You know, we do fund a good chunk of the Dufferin County budget, and that officer that's working for Dufferin County, really, we need them to spend some time on Orangeville, as well as the rest of the county. So just wanted to make that point. Any other questions, councillors, on this item? I see nobody at this point, so let's
Councillor Sherwood, did you still have something?
I'm sorry, Councillor Sherwood, did you have a question?
I was, thank
All right,
you. Thank you, Councillor Peters. I was kind of going the same way with your thought process, Your Worship. I realized that this was very important to tidy up our tourism study, but it's a hard pill to swallow, knowing that we're paying 50% of the county's salary, or our county's budget, ideally paying 50% of that person's salary and the whole salary on this person. I was wondering, are we best to hold off midway to the year to let the Dufferin County person come on board to see if they're going to be working towards things for dedicated just specifically to us, but at the same time I can see the need for us moving forward on our own. It's just I look at this as being a double $113,000 times 2.
Yeah. I see Mr. Brown with his hand up. I'm kind of rethinking this. I mean, this person is going to be under the control of our community services department, going to be working exclusively on issues with respect to Orangeville. And we've got some pretty exciting plans that get to unfold in downtown Orangeville. The sidewalk improvements, the potential building across the road, a redevelopment of Alexandria Park, and of course programming and events that we know we do a good job here in Orangeville, and people like to attend these things. So in order to have those robust plans and improve on those plans and bring tourism dollars, we probably have to have a dedicated person here. Just wondering, the hiring, I mean, even, if this budget gets passed tonight, there's a hiring practice that has to be implemented, and it's likely that person's not going to be hired until Q2 anyway. But so in the whole scheme of things, that 3/4 year is only going to be charged against this budget, and there'll be something going towards reserves probably, or at the end of the year. Mr. Brennan, do you want to speak?
Yeah, Your Worship, I just want to express, and I thank you for your comments on our staff, because we do have some amazing staff and very eager staff to steer the ship and get us in the right place. I just want to make a comment that when we talk about respect of the upper tier municipality and the lower tier, I think we all take the point that it is the one taxpayer, but we certainly got to understand that we are two separate municipalities. The upper tier municipality got the right to tax and to levy tax, just like the lower tier municipality. We are two separate entities. Though we want to work together, as we do want to work together with the remaining lower tiers and our neighbors around us, we must remember that from my perspective, we have a responsibility to the taxpayers to run our organization and to deliver our programs. And at a population of over 30,000, we are not a real small municipality anymore. We are certainly not at the 100,000 or the large cities, but it is a complicated municipality when it comes to delivering our services, and we need people to do it. And I would say that, you know, we need to focus on our municipality per se. Thank you.
And before I go to Councillor Andrews, I would hope that those two individuals at a cost of in the range of $225,000 between the two of them, potentially, if they know what they're doing, are going to bring millions of dollars in revenue into businesses and the hospitality industry in particular in our area. So let's hope that that's the kind of return on the investment that we're going to reap here for the businesses locally. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And the ROI that you reference is so important in this particular case. And I know many members of the town staff were nodding their heads as you were expressing somewhat of a revision in your view to this. I truly support this particular lined item. With my role with BDAC, it's important that the strategy that had been put forth as council received that a few weeks ago is put into motion and supported with this particular individual. I understand the potential collaboration that will exist at the county, but as Mr. Brennan has very clearly expressed, we are a community that has much going for it. We need to have an individual that's going to be able to spearhead many of these projects that you've referenced, Your Worship, and I feel strongly in supporting that particular lined item.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Any other comments, councillors? I can't see Councillor Post, nor can I see Councillor Taylor, but if you could vocalize if you wish to speak, that would be great. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Post, was that you?
Yeah, no, I was just saying I'm good. Thank you, though, for checking in.
Thank you. All right, Madam Treasurer, can we move on to the next page, please?
Yes, sir. So we move on to facilities and parks, and we start with facilities. Do you wish me to move to the?
I'm looking at the damn property taxes here, Madam Treasurer. I mean, how can we control those?
Well, sir.
Huh? Looks like there's been a bit of a jump there in the last couple of years. Okay, I'm just kidding. Next page, please. Very good. We did have a conversation about the increased requirement for the police facility. That the town is now taking that on as one of its facilities. Mr. Osmond elaborated on that earlier. Any comments or questions, councillors? Councillor Sherwood.
Yeah, the police facility is showing up there 3 times. 133, then lower down it's a negative 4682, and then further down it's a positive 9,000. Can you help clarify that?
Madam Treasurer, can you answer that question?
Yeah, so just bear with me for a second. So 133, and where else are you seeing this, Councillor Sherwood?
4682, and then right at the bottom, it says service level impact $9,000.
Right. Your Worship, can I circle back to this? I just need a moment because, like I said, when I'm sharing my screen, I don't have access to any other system. I would just ask our Deputy Treasurer, who's also on the line, if she can quickly take a look at the the differences of these three numbers and get back to us shortly.
Okay. So Ms. West, when you're ready to comment, just weigh in, but we'll move on to the next page. Thank you.
Your Worship?
Yes, go right ahead, Faye.
Through you, it's actually 3 different types of changes. So you can see within the material drivers, we tie it back to our service level changes. So we actually, the first police facility line of 133, 170, that was a straight reallocation. So it was, if it was budgeted 133,000 in the police budget, when we moved it up to facilities, we moved the budget amount. And then there was an inflationary impact. That's where the decrease of $4,682 comes from. And then if you go down further, service level impact, police facility 9,000. That's facilities looking at the bills and suggesting that they need an additional 9,000.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Councilor Sherwood, you're good?
Sure, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Let's move on.
Okay. Your Worship, we probably have to go to Parks.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah, so Parks budget. Oh, no, this is facilities. My apologies.
Way down.
Could you, I'm sorry, could you go back up? I saw another line on the Eco Chill there. That was part of, Mr. Austin, was that part of your,
That
was capital. Sorry, can you give me the page number, Your Worship?
Well, can you scroll further down? Keep going. Keep going.
It's in the capital budget.
It's in the capital.
Okay.
Yeah. Keep going. Yeah.
Okay.
Keep going.
I think you passed it.
Oh, did we pass it? I'm sorry.
Well,
But maybe you can comment on that Eco Chill expense. Is this the one that we approved last year, or is there another expense?
That's correct. It's in the 21 budget. It's in the 21 capital budget, Your Worship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the capital budget, 2 million. Yes. Yep.
Okay. And could you just tell the public again? As I recall, we spoke about this last year. There's actually a return on investment on this particular type of equipment, that it was going to not only provide heating but also cooling. So can you just elaborate again for the public on that item?
Sure, Your Worship. The sustainable refrigeration system, and last year we used EcoChill because the brand is quite well known, but it's generally referred to as sustainable refrigeration system. So what it is, if people were, I'll give you a good idea, if you're driving along by any of our arenas, you see a lot of vapor going in the air, comes from our condenser, and that's waste heat. So what the EcoChill system does is it captures all that. There's no more condensers. And it takes all that energy, what I refer to as energy. It's like a small energy plant. When you're making ice, it generates energy, and that energy it forms in heat, and you take that heat and transfer it into the building. So it could be used to heat your hot water. It can be used for heating your building, for your dressing rooms, for spaces in the building. Any excess heat, in the case of Alder, the intention is for the heat to be transferred into the pool to help heat the water and to decrease the cost of us heating water for the pool, which is large volume of water. In terms of payback on a system such as a sustainable refrigeration system, the payback could be anywhere from 7 to 15 years, depending on what you're doing. In our case, we're using a double pad, so it's all different. So we'll be looking at doing changing out the existing refrigeration plant where you have 4 or 5 compressors, and we put in it all comes in on one big skid, and everything stands within the unit. So all the energy in the unit gets transferred, and all the heat gets transferred. If you're operating in the summertime and you're making ice in the summertime, you take the When you don't need the energy, it turns all the energy into ice balls, about the size of a softball. And those ice balls sit in the big tower. And as you are asking for energy and you need energy and the plant is not totally operating, it actually melts those balls and reverses the energy and back into your building. And you get to use it again. So it's a pretty complex system, but it's really all about sustainable energy, and the savings from the energy savings pays for that EcoChill system or a sustainable refrigeration system anywhere from 7 to, could be 10 years, could be 14 years, depending on the use of the system.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Okay, excuse me, Madam Treasurer, what's up next? Parks budget, this is where we're at, okay. Councillors, any questions on the parks budget? Seeing none, can we just move down to material drivers there for a moment? Again, very little impact on the levy. Okay, next item, please.
So the last division is recreation and events.
Mm-hmm. So just to recap, Mr. Osmond, if I may ask this question. So on the compensation line there, this is everyone that works within your recreation department that puts on events and schedules and essentially interacts with the public on events. Is that correct?
That's, Your Worship, that's correct. It includes everything from events to all your aquatic programming, all your fitness programming, any program with seniors, anything to do with programming is on that budget line. And essentially what happened in that budget line is that traditionally over the years, the GM position, if you would, there used to be the director position, the GM position, and the assistant position to the GM were all in that budget line, and that's what you see as removed, and that's what got reallocated across the 5 divisions.
Right.
That's the difference in that. Yep.
Yeah, and under outside services, last year we had some success with the summer concert series and also the movie nights that your staff put on. They were very successful, and I see you've got some budget in there for those this year. Let's hope we don't have the same kind of scrutiny as we did last year under COVID, but yep. I'm glad to see you're embarking on some of those family-oriented nights that we had that were really well attended and appreciated, I think, by the residents. So thank you for that. Councillor Sherwood, I see your hand up.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. Through you to Mr. Osmond. Would the $50,000 also include if we're wanting to continue with the lights extravaganza as well? Would it fall under that as well?
Your Worship, through the Councillor Sherwood, yes, that's where we captured all the events and any had the things we had during the, I'll call it the COVID time, and the success we had with that. And of course, there's also a $25,000 revenue piece that we did take in $35,000 in revenue, but we lowered it down, not to be too optimistic, and we'll try 25, and if we do better, that'd be wonderful.
Right, for sponsorship, potential sponsorship.
Sorry, yes, the sponsorship. Yep.
Very good. Councillors, any further questions on this page? Seeing and hearing none, let's move on. Right, again, $51,000 levy impact. Okay, let's move on to the next item, please.
Okay, so we're moving on to infrastructure services, starting with planning.
Right. Any questions, councillors? No. Very good. Next page, please.
Public Works.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Jones. I see this is in every year's budget, the outside services, but it's also creeping up to 1.3 million almost. Could you explain what that is? Because I know it also appears in water and waterworks for over $1 million as well. So save me jumping back down there if you want to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, Mr. Jones.
Mr. Jones.
Absolutely. Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Sherwood. That involves, there are a number of line items that would go into those codes. That would include everything from repairs to curb, catch basins, and manholes that we do annually. It would include outside services for our sidewalk rehabilitation program. It would include assistance with street sweeping. It would include assistance with some asphalt patching, ditching, bridge and culvert repairs. There's a whole raft of codes, and that's just within the public works codes. Within water and wastewater, similarly, we get assistance sometimes with things like hydrant flushing and so forth. And outside services also includes things like chemical testing that are required both for water and for wastewater. It includes the cost of purchasing chemicals as well. So there's just a whole slew of different codes that get rolled up into that outside services line.
So that typically would be like third party or contract people that you would hire, say for snow removal example, that all falls under there, correct? If you're hiring outside companies to assist.
Correct, yeah, for instance, for clearing the site or for clearing the, doing the snow clearing for the bus stops, that would be outside services as well, exactly.
And is the outside sidewalk plow contract buried in there as well?
No, we actually hire seasonal staff and we rent sidewalk equipment so that we do that in-house.
Okay. But the rental of the equipment, is that in there, or is that some other?
I don't believe that that's rolled up into outside services. I think that's under lease costs.
Okay. Very good. All right, councillors, any further questions on this page?
Yeah, I've got one quick one there, Your Worship.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. And again, as Mr. Jones had referenced very quickly, and this is regarding lease agreements, and it is a nominal amount in comparison to the line item that Councillor Sherwood just referenced. But in regards to service and lease agreements, I see, in years ahead, it's pretty stable, but somewhat of a jump of 18.5%. If you could provide just some clarity on that, Mr. Jones, that would be appreciated.
Mr. Jones.
Through your worship to Councillor Andrews, yes, that actually does relate to the sidewalk equipment that we use. The price to lease them this year did indeed go up somewhat from previous years, and that's why that's what that line item is.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that explanation.
Mr. Jones, if and when electric sidewalk plows come around, I hope you might consider them. The clink and the clank at 5 in the morning, and we're getting lots of calls on that, but it is what it is. So, but hopefully in the future, that noise level might be a thing of the past. That would be nice. Okay, again, councillors, before we move on, any further questions here? Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Let's go move on.
Okay. Cemetery.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Am I moving on?
Yes, please move on.
Okay, thank you. Transportation and development.
Very good.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Post.
Thank you very much. Through you to Mr. Jones or Mr. Lackey, I'm just wondering, when it comes to transit, with the addition of a fourth route, I see that the proposed budget user fees are only $800 higher than the previous year. And I'm just wondering, with the addition of the fourth route, if we would not see a substantial amount of user fees that would be any higher than that.
Mr. Lackey? Mr. Jones, go ahead.
Through your worship to Councillor Post, there's a couple of reasons for that line there. The first is that we aren't expecting to move to a fourth route until at least the summer. It depends when we can get the transit transfer point approved and constructed and move forward. At the time of preparing this budget, there was considerable uncertainty surrounding that. In addition, we were aware that the early part of this year, we were potentially looking at still being in COVID times, and indeed we are collecting no revenue right now for our transit system. And as such, we took a very conservative approach when looking at the increase in revenue.
Thank you. I appreciate that explanation.
Okay, councillors, any further questions on this page? All right, seeing none, Madam Treasurer, can we move on?
Absolutely. So the next is environment. We start with water.
Councillors, any questions here?
None.
It's expensive to have clean water coming through our pipes, isn't it? If I could ask a question here under water billing, is that item, is that what we are paying Orangeville Hydro for our water billing?
Your worship, no. Actually, that is the number that was included in terms of the revenue that we bring in on water billing. We completed a water and wastewater rate study in 2020 to set the rates for 2020 through 2024, and it was identified that we needed to be bringing in a little bit less revenue than we had been bringing in, and that's what that line item is.
Okay, thank you. Just out of curiosity, could you tell us what we do pay Orangeville Hydro to? Is that a line item there?
I don't see it directly here. I would defer that to finance if perhaps they have that number at their fingertips.
Treasurer, do you have an idea there?
Just give us a moment here, Your Worship. Faye, if you can look up that number for us. We can, Your Worship, if you can give Faye a minute or two so that she can look that up and we can circle back.
Sure, we can do that. Do you want to move on to the next page, Madam Treasurer?
Absolutely. I probably have to scroll for a few minutes because water, wastewater is not. Oh, there it is. Okay, there we go.
Okay. I'm curious about the Credit Valley Conservation Authority line item. Can you expand on that to Mr. Jones?
Absolutely. The Conservation Authority levies the town for their services on an annual basis, and we pay for that 50% out of wastewater and 50% out of tax dollars. And this is where that line item shows up.
Okay, thank you.
With respect to the charges to Hydro, I was able to find them. It is split 50-50 between water and wastewater, and it appears that the total is $414,000 for 2021.
Wow.
Between the two services, between water and wastewater.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on this page, councillors? Hearing none, let's move on, Madam Treasurer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the last is building.
Yes. And again, this is cost recovery, more or less, Madam Treasurer?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Any questions? See Councillor Sherwood has her hand up. Go ahead, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, through you to perhaps Madam Treasurer is probably going to be able to answer this one. I see the transfer to reserves is in this budget is quite substantial. that's to offset on any revenues, I would assume, that we predicted to have that didn't have, because they have to be a kind of a washout department.
Through you to Councillor Sherwood, that is absolutely correct. So this is transfer from reserve, as this is a negative number. So yeah, this is to offset, because as you can see on the revenue side of things, we're only bringing in, or we're projecting to bring in 349. So to offset the delta between gross expenditure and revenue, we are going into the reserves.
So Madam Treasurer, would those reserves actually be the building department's reserves, or are they coming out of the general capital reserves or general reserves?
This is a self-funded division, Councillor Sherwood, so therefore the reserve that is assigned to this particular division is a self-funded reserve. It has nothing to do with our tax-funded capital reserve.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if I could ask the question, so the drop in revenue is just the expected decrease in building permits that are going to be issued in 2021, Mr. Jones?
Yes, Your Worship, that's correct.
All right. I think is that the end of our?
That's correct, Your Worship. That's the end of the operating budget. We have now gone through pretty much division by division and line by line.
Thank you. Well, again, I want to reiterate, which has been stated before by a number of councillors, that this is a very good budget. I'm very happy with what's been put in front of us. I think I see some nodding heads. You know, the only thought I have is it's still a tough year for a lot of businesses, a lot of residents, and we do have the ability to reach into some of our reserves if we so desire to bring this down to zero if we want to. And I'm just going to throw that out there. Any other councillors wish to comment on that? Councillor or Deputy Mayor McIntosh, do you wish to speak to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. I find this to be an excellent budget. I hear some real horror stories out there because of the pandemic, what some cities and towns are going through with the increases that they need. And I think to bring a budget in that's below 1% is absolutely amazing. I think great work by staff, and I too would like to see 0%, but I have no issue with anything under 1%. And, you know, I'd even be willing to make a motion now that we pass that budget as is.
Okay, Councillor Sherwood, did you want to second that?
No, Your Worship, I wanted to speak on this.
Okay, go ahead.
I know Deputy Mayor has the motion on the floor, so we can wait to see if we're going to get a seconder and vote on that. If that motion fails, I would like to put a further motion that we take $356,417 out of our tax rate stabilization reserves to come up with a 0%.
All right.
Mr. Mayor?
I see your hand up, Ms. McKinney. Can you go?
Can we, before we deliberate further, would it be possible to ask for a 5-minute break for staff?
Absolutely. So let's do that. Let's have a recess, and we'll be back around 9:32. Thank you. Tosh. That was to pass the budget as it is with 0.97% tax levy. We have a seconder for that. Councillor Post is seconded. Any further comments, councillors, on this? Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I have two. The first is I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the reserves. Wondering if the treasurer might be able to share page 206.
Okay.
And I understand this conversation will likely continue if and when we see a 2020 surplus come across the council chambers. But I'm noticing in the general capital that the number is trending downwards over 7+ years, and whether some money is being captured in other buckets or not, I'm not sure, but I certainly don't enjoy, I wouldn't want to see a long-term downward trend in the reserve, so maybe we can speak to those numbers a little bit more specifically.
Madam Treasurer, can you share 206?
Absolutely, Your Worship. Just give me a moment, please. Your Worship, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I must be on an old copy. You're right here on 209. So as I look across that general capital number,
yeah,
right, 9.5, 8,
yeah,
7, 6. Can we maybe just speak to why that is going down over time? Is that a lack of contribution, or that's being used to offset debt, or I'll let you.
Absolutely. So through Your Worship to Councillor Peters. So first and foremost, one of the reasons you're seeing a trend going toward a lower end of that reserve level. So first and foremost, one of the things I said in terms of forecasting, these outer year balances are more based on studies that we have right now, some of the projects we are undertaking, and as well as any projected surplus that we will realize. So clearly any outer year numbers are subject to change, are subject to other variables and assumptions. That being said, this is not due to a direct impact of the contribution per se. This is essentially the reserve that we, and this is a tax-funded reserve, by the way, this is the reserve that we use predominantly to finance most of our capital projects. So one of the things that you will see as we go somewhere, let's say 2023 or 2024 budget, that some of these numbers are going to have a much more you will see a much more realistic version of these numbers. Now, if Councillor Peters would recall the graph that I've shown while I was presenting, and Your Worship, if I may, can I bring up that graph again?
Yeah.
If that's okay with Councillor Peters as well?
Please do.
Councillor Peters, is that okay with you?
Of course, yes, please do.
Okay. Because one of the things we have to understand is, yes, this is one reserves that we use for capital projects, and it's one of the predominant one we use, but there are other reserves that we also use for capital projects and that make up our entire reserve bucket. So if you just bear with me for a second, I'm just going to go into to pull up my presentation from earlier tonight. And I think this will make more sense as you have something visual in front of you. So I'm going to jump right to the end of the presentation. Just bear with me. All right, I think I missed it. All right, so if you look at this, and one of the things I wanted to do this here, just to provide you with visuals without any numbers to clutter that. And one of the things I said is when you're looking at your debt level, as well as your reserve level, the trend you would like to see is that your overall debt level going down and your overall reserve level going up. The other thing you would like to see is the debt to reserve ratio. So if you look at the overall health of the municipality, we are actually trending in a very positive way. So I just want to make that point very quickly. As you are looking at that one particular reserve level, Councillor Peters, that overall, we are actually trending quite positively, and the financial outlook from my vantage point, from where I'm sitting right now, is actually quite positive.
Right, so if I may, Mr. Mayor, I understand where you're coming from, but if we can go back to the actual numbers there, The graph trending upward would seem to be in the non-discretionary reserves, and part of that is going to be because we dropped a ton of money on the waste water treatment plant upgrades, for example. So the obligatory reserves in that regard, for example, will rise for 20 years until we need to do another major capital upgrade there. So I don't necessarily think that reflects accurately what we're doing on the capital side. And if the capital number is going down and we're saving in the buckets that have their own influences like water and wastewater, I don't think that's necessarily painting the same picture. You know where I'm coming from.
Okay, so Your Worship, if I may?
Yes.
So any contribution to reserve, so I understand where you're coming from, Councillor Peters, so I'm going to approach it in a different way, right? And I understand that you're focusing on one particular reserve per se, and so I will use that reserve for the purpose of this explanation. So it is very difficult for any treasurer to pinpoint an optimal number for any reserve level. So, there is no mathematical equation that says a general capital reserve should be 7 million for 10 years.
Yep.
I mean, I hope you appreciate that. So one of the things that we look at is based on our overall capital needs, which we come to that conclusion through different studies, whether asset management plan, development charges, so on and so forth. So based on our asset management needs, our capital needs, are we relatively maintaining a healthy reserve level? May that be obligatory or discretionary. The other thing you have to understand, if you wish to ramp up your reserve level, you can by all means contribute to it, and that would actually mean further increase to your levy increase year over year. So perhaps this is a conversation as we move further into 2022 and outer years. That's one of the things that I'm hoping to do, is bring a very robust reserve and reserve fund policy to this council. So perhaps this is a discussion that council can embark on at the time. And I absolutely appreciate the point you're making. And I, as a treasurer for the town, I would also like to see some of our reserve level develop. Now, one of the tools that I've provided earlier today when I was presenting is that some of the savings in future year we'll be seeing through the OPS transition, council now can take that savings and put it towards non-discretionary reserve. I leave it with at council's discretion, but that's one of the way of doing it without putting a lot of pressure on levy increase. So this is a really good question, and I hope I have answered it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'll summarize sort of where I was coming from and then let other councillors weigh in. But we're seeing a tax levy increase of less than 1%, which is very positive given the current conditions and other municipal goals and budgets that have been passed. But in doing so, we've lowered the amount that we contribute to the reserves. We've kept the capital expenditures flat from a levy perspective, but in fact, we know year over year those tend to increase, and those projects are not small when they do come about, right? So when we're talking about several $1 million projects, especially on the infrastructure side, while lowering our contribution to the reserves in the interest of keeping the levy at a reasonable amount. I just think a couple of those factors could compound over time, and I just want to be aware of that before we go too far down that road. So thank you.
Before I call on Councillor Andrew, I just wanted to comment, Councillor Peters, we do have some town assets that we're looking at right now in terms of liquidating those assets, and they are not insignificant in value. Talking about ORDC, and I'm talking about the Humber lands, which I think conservative estimate would be $15 to $20 million would come to the town if both of those real estate assets were sold. So I'm with you. I think all councillors are with you. We don't want to be eroding our reserves. We'd like to accelerate capital improvements, and I think if I remember last budget, Madam Treasurer, you mentioned that we were lagging a little bit behind in terms of infrastructure, and that we needed to try and pick that up. And I think that's what Councillor Peters is talking about. So if and when those real estate transactions happen, which I think they will in the next year or two, we should be able to apportion some of that money into reserves and accelerate some of our capital improvements and infrastructure deficit, I think was the term you used, I believe, Treasurer. So I think, when I look at the whole picture, and if we look at the reserve and debt ratio chart that Madam Treasurer put in front of us, it certainly looks like a positive outlook for the town of Orangeville. I mean, we've got a lot of good things happening right now, and again, the reallocation of those real estate assets maybe into our budget talk in the future is really going to make us even more stable and help accelerate some of the infrastructure projects that we've got in front of us. So we've got a motion on the floor right now. I'm sorry, Councillor, I forgot. Go right ahead, sir.
Quite all right. Thank you, Your Worship. And before we end up getting into the discussion about the motion that's on the floor, I want to thank Councillor Peters for his questions that were posed to Madam Treasurer. Very quickly, Madam Treasurer, I was going through my notes from last night, and you referenced something that you were going to speak to tonight, and this would be on page 201 regarding projected debt over a 10-year period, and your detailed graphs really helped out in providing some clarity, but if you would be so kind just to provide a very quick summary on the projected debt for 2021 versus 2022, new financing. Can you explain that 30 seconds or less?
30 seconds or less? Okay. You
or
always
you
give me time limit, Councillor Andrews. I appreciate that. So when we are projecting debt, and I know that Councillor Peters actually asked that question via email, that some of the debts in further years, outer years, are actually projections. They're not real debt yet, right? So that's that part. I'm not going to get into it today. So between last year and this year, the only debt line or item that you will see that is of any significance is our line of credit, which we took on to finance the upfront transition cost. And again, even with that, one of the things I will say to you, I know I have 30 seconds, is that I ask you to look back to the debt to reserve ratio, because debt or reserves cannot be looked at in isolation. These are the two kind of left or right hand of financial outlook. So when we look at them in combination or in sort of in tandem, so to speak, we are actually trending quite positively. And I cannot take full credit for this. Clearly, my predecessors and Town of Orangeville's debt and reserve levels were maintained very well. So what I can tell you right now that we're extremely responsible when it comes to our debt envelope. One of the things I've said in our budget document is that province actually gives us a very prescribed criteria as to how much debt we can take, and our annual repayment limit is within the provincial threshold. So that is one of the ways to, so if I really have to give you, and clearly I've taken more than 30 seconds, but the 5 seconds that I have left, we are well within the provincial threshold for our annual repayment limit. Hope that helps, Councillor Andrews.
It has helped tremendously from my seat, and again, no stopwatch was being applied in any way. I was glad that you were able to provide that explanation. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Peters, you had your hand up again?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was the second item from before, but we skidded out onto some other topics, which is fine. But just while we're discussing the net levy and the impacts, we said we'd circle back perhaps to the tree program, and I do think it's worth a line item both in this year and future years if we're going to hit that canopy target. So this will sort of be my last plea, whether that's operating capital or reserves or levy. I do believe there needs to be a line item here, and then moving forward, it can be assessed whether it goes up or down. But the old adage about when to plant a tree, I think is appropriate.
Okay, and I believe Mr. Jones said there was some tree planting money available in the budget currently. So you're asking for additional funds? Is
In my discussion with Mr. Jones, and my understanding, and I'll let him clarify, was that that was mostly tree replacement as well as catching up on boulevard trees that would have been planted in previous years. So, you know, I would be looking for a line item to go beyond that.
Right. Okay. Mr. Jones?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Peters, that's correct. We've put in a service level change to increase our budget for replacement trees by 28,000. We have fallen behind in recent years, in part due to you know, some damage to boulevard trees, and in part due to the increased cost. We have increased the budget for the next 5 years by beyond 2021 by $1,000 a year, but certainly we could consider increasing that if we were looking to increase the budget for boulevard trees. I should also point out, when we're talking about the 2021 year, 2020 was a very difficult year to purchase trees. Apparently, many of the places where we buy trees from, where they're grown, use some seasonal labor, which was difficult to come by this year, and so it was actually difficult to find trees this year, and we didn't get as many planted as we want. I'm concerned that we may see the same thing in 2021. So this may be an item that we want to really ramp up beyond 2021 when there's a greater availability.
Okay. I'm certainly supportive of more trees, Councillor Peters, and I think our council likes trees. Taking Mr. Jones' advice, should we agree that in the fall of this year that will be added as a line item and we will address it then, rather than change things right now?
I'll leave it to council. I just I know we've set a target for canopy, and you know we can't get there in the last 5 years, right? We need these to grow over time to get there. So it's I don't want to get hung up on what may be a small issue, but I think it needs to be in there year over year moving forward.
Well, I can tell you I'm supportive of this going forward, and my recommendation would be let's have some further discussions this year and sort of set that financial target for inclusion in the next budget and roll them out in 2022. This is going to be another funky year for everybody. I don't know, as Mr. Jones had said, the planning of construction projects is still going to be up in the air, I think, for the next few months, and other things like the availability of trees at nurseries and things. So I don't know. I'm supportive of you, but I think let's have a discussion maybe in May or June and set the target. Maybe you could do some more research for us, Councillor Peters, to come up with a dollar value that you think makes sense, and I would completely support putting a line item in there for regular additions to our tree can. I think
Your Worship,
we committed to it, right? I mean, we committed to a 40% attempt at creating 40% as council did, so I think we have to be supportive. Councillor Taylor, I saw your hand up, sir.
Yes, if I may, Mr. Jones has always been very patient with me as he explains that tree replacement program to me, and I'm not sure if I put words in your mouth, Mr. Jones, but I think you're frustrated by it too. I'm frustrated by it, and not because of the way the program is designed, just simply because it takes so darn long sometimes to get a tree to residents. So I think that Councillor Peters is spot on with this initiative, and it's funny, trees can be expensive if you're putting in something nice, but twigs don't have to be that much, and over time they do grow. So I wouldn't have a suggestion in terms of what that dollar amount should be, but I certainly would love to see us do something more. And then, to add on to that, Mr. Jones, the next thing would be sidewalk replacement and fixing that, but that's probably for another day because it's the same situation.
Is that satisfactory, Councillor Peters, that we do some studying on this and maybe get an idea of what the cost of installation of trees are and the cost of the trees and the size and the caliber of them, and then bring that back for a review and inclusion in 2022?
Yep, I won't let it fade away. So
I know you won't. Absolutely. So, we've got a motion on the floor right now. Deputy Mayor McIntosh and Councillor Sherwood, I think, secondly.
Councillor Post.
I'm sorry, Councillor Post. So let's have further discussion now on that motion. Councillor Taylor has his hand up. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'm just as an understanding for me, are we voting on these two budgets separately, or are we voting on them as a whole? Is the motion for just tonight with?
I think the whole thing, Councillor Taylor, the 0.97 is what our treasurer has presented to us, and that is the motion that the Deputy Mayor McIntosh has put forward.
May I ask just a follow-up question then, point of clarification? There were some things that we discussed last night in the budget discussion, and in my mind, they're unsettled. There was a laneway that we talked about, some solutions to. There was certainly a sidewalk plan for Faulkner. I think we discussed having the Spencer lights and the Alder lights in the capital plan. I just want to make sure that we've got all those things captured and understand what those implications are. Sometimes you sign off on these things and then we've been guilty of realizing we didn't include it. And I just want to make sure that we've put all those things to bed, and they're not quite clear in my mind where we ended up on those.
Okay, I agree. Let's bring them out then. So the laneway, which was Survey Lane, I believe what we talked about last night was to leave it in, but to defer any action on that until staff came back with an understanding of what the infrastructure was underneath and what the cost would be, maybe to strip the asphalt and the gravel, put soil and seed down. So that was what my understanding. I'm seeing some nodding heads here, but leave it in, but not spend the money until we get a further understanding of whether or not we can turn that into an easement rather than a roadway. So I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads here, Councillor Taylor. Is that satisfactory to you?
It is, thank you.
All right, and on the sidewalk issue, I think the idea was to defer that until such time as we have some public engagement and go through a further report by staff. And if that's brought back to council in a few months, and council decides they wish to go ahead, that can be started in 2021 through into reserves, or if we wish, push it off into a budget discussion for 2021, fall of 2021. Is that, I'm seeing a nodding head here, Madam Treasurer. Councillor Taylor, you happy with that?
Candidly, I'd prefer that we put it in this year. I think it's low. I think we've all decided that we're a safety council, and the public has spoken. They signed a petition in that area. I would suggest that we add it for this year.
Well, I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, you've got your hand up.
There was actually a vote that was taken last night, and I can read what the vote was recorded, that staff investigate and obtain public input on the construction of a 390-meter section of sidewalk commencing at the north driveway into ODSS and ending at the intersection of Northgate Drive and Forest Park Road, immediately across from the walkway connecting this intersection to Goldgate Crescent, and report back to council.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
I see Councillor Post, you have your hand up. Do you wish to speak to that?
No, I just wanted to clarify the same thing, that the motion had been made last night that I had moved.
And there was two items, councillors, we talked about last night. I know Councillor Sherwood made a motion on the $25,000 cost of new speed signs as a result of the speed reduction bylaw. And the other issue was $87,000, I believe, on the Spencer lights. I believe we passed a motion last night, did we not? Sorry, okay, I'm going to defer again to Madam Clerk.
Do you want me to perhaps just go over what was actually passed last night?
Yes, please.
Okay, so there was the item that I just read with respect to the sidewalk matter. The other matter was that prior, and you spoke about it earlier, Mr. Mayor, with respect to Survey Lane. So the wording is actually that prior to commencing any work with regard to the capital project and the numbers listed, Survey Lane rehabilitation, that staff investigate the potential of disposal or decommissioning of Survey Lane and report back to council with options and associated costs. And then the next one was with respect to the electronic fare collection system, so that prior to proceeding with the implementation of an electronic fare collection system as part of the capital budget project and the number, that staff investigate and report back to council on the merits and budgetary impacts of providing fare-free transit in the town.
Right.
So those are the actual items that were voted on. There was, with respect to the other items that you've referred to, Mr. Mayor, there was a mention of it, but there was no seconder to the motion, and therefore a vote was not called.
Okay, so Mr. Jones, can you comment on the costs associated with installation of the speed reduction initiative, and also the Spencer lights, which I believe is something that council did vote to move ahead with? How are we going to pay for those two items?
Your worship, my recollection is when we came forward to council at the last meeting with respect to the town-wide 40-kilometer speed limit reduction, we identified that there would be 186 new 40-kilometer-an-hour signs that would be required at a cost of approximately $25,000. My recollection is that as part of the motion, Councillor Sherwood suggested that we identify that $25,000 would be taken out of reserves. I stand to be corrected. And a similar motion, I believe, was brought forward as it relates to the traffic signals on Dell Road, that the costs associated with those would also be taken out of reserves.
Right, that's what I recall as well. So, Madam Treasurer, you've got your hand up.
Yes, and I believe, and I may be wrong about this, it is long night. So one of the things we can do is, before the final budget document is published, we can include these line items that Councillor Sherwood voted on to be included in the final document.
Right, and those two were passed by council. I mean, the Riddell lights and the speed reduction was passed by council. So, but it will not have a tax levy impact. It will be taken out of reserves.
That's correct, Your Worship.
And if I may, Mr. Mayor, further to what Nandini has indicated, Nandini did indicate last night that she would capture those particular items in the final version of the budget.
Right. Okay, Councillor Taylor, is that satisfactory, sir?
Thank you, sir.
Very good. Thank you for bringing those items up and having us have the clarity and transparency on those matters. That's great. So again, councillors, we have a motion on the floor to accept the 0.97. There was a further discussion by Councillor Sherwood that if this motion does fail, that we bring forward another motion, but we got to vote first, so let's go on this. Yeah, the motion is to pass the budget as presented at 0.97% tax levy increase. All in favor? Okay. All right. Fair enough. So we have passed the budget at 0.97%. Congratulations to staff for all the hard work. Councillors, you've done your due diligence. I know we're a little late tonight, but I really like going through this in more in depth. I think it's educational for all of us. I think it brings out some other points. I think it's educational for the public. And Madam Treasurer, go ahead.
Your Worship, to Your Worship, to Council, there was another motion to approve the self-funded budget for water, wastewater, and building.
Let's have another motion. Deputy Mayor, do you want to make that motion? Or okay, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. All in favor? This is the self-funded portion of the budget. Thank you. Is that complete now, Madam Treasurer? And we know you've created with your staff an award-winning document that we're sure is going to be lauded by your colleagues out there in the municipal world. So, councillors, let's just go around the horn. I mean, let's let everybody have one final talk. Maybe We'll start as we normally do. We'll go left to right here. Maybe we'll have Peters, Post, and Taylor first. Councillor Peters, you want to have a final?
Certainly, I don't have much to say. I'm happy with the productivity of the conversation. The responses from staff is always very professional and complete, and look forward to doing it again next year.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say I'm grateful for all of staff's hard work. I think in our community, we're exceptionally lucky to have an exceptional town staff like we do, who have taken the time to really understand the constraints of COVID and come forward with an incredible document that kept the budget under 1% through a pandemic, while being able to maintain service levels, address infrastructure deficits, and really ensure that some really important neighborhood projects like Rebecca Hills Park, for example, were able to be covered under the 2021 budget. So just congratulations to staff and to council for hard work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Post. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would like to offer personal thanks to Ms. Syed and to Mr. Brennan. Both of them spent a considerable amount of time with me answering my questions privately, getting prepared for this meeting, and I really do appreciate it. And as a sidebar, I do appreciate my council mates, and I can see why my questioning tonight would have been upsetting, and it certainly was not my intent. But Mayor Brown, I'm very disappointed in your conduct tonight, and I felt that it was disrespectful.
Very good. Okay, so now we'll go to Andrews, Sherwood, and McIntosh. Councillor Andrews.
Great, thank you very much, Your Worship. As has been echoed, the exemplary presentation by the Treasurer, Madam Treasurer, thank you so much for the detail. I think that, for those of us who've had to review not only budgets in the elected role, but also in our other professional roles, this is an exceptional way of going through it. And I think the, compliments I also have for my fellow councillors. We all ended up doing a ton of homework. We, had a chance to review a lot of information. We've posed a number of questions privately to town staff, and we've been also able to get the information that we needed to make the decision. I think the individuals who are going to reap, obviously, the positivity of this is the taxpayer. In these times of COVID, we know people are suffering, but at the same time, coming in at under 1% is a very positive outcome as far as I'm concerned. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. Again, I'm pretty much echoing what everyone else said. This was a really, really phenomenal budget. It was too difficult to cut anything because it came in really, really lean, and that definitely goes with without saying that the lead, Ms. Syed, has a lot to be grateful for. You know that I wanted 1%, but I'm very satisfied that it's 0.97. I still think that that's something that our taxpayers should be really grateful for, because we know that you came in with just what we required. So again, I thank you and all staff.
Very good. And Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship. As I echoed before, I've heard some real horror stories out there. For example, Toronto's budget and stuff like that. So, I was very pleased with staff. They did an excellent job. I know there's going to be some taxpayers that are going to complain, no matter what we do. But I think this is the best we could do, and I think we've done it. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you. So, councillors, I think well done tonight and last night. I think we did illuminate a lot of the internal workings of the town for the benefit of the public. I want to thank you, and of course staff again for the work that they did through COVID, and with all of what was going on through the COVID situation, pushed this budget back a few weeks, but we got to this point, and I know we've got a light at the end of the tunnel, the vaccines that are on the horizon, and hopefully we can all get back to where we want to be in the next few months. So with that, I think we're complete. Mr. Brennan, did you have anything further you'd like to add, sir?
Well, Your Worship, I would just like to thank yourself and all members of council for your support and understanding and direction when we have strategic plans and major plans in place and we follow them. It does make things easier. Of course, I will echo again my thanks to staff, Madam Treasurer, our general managers, the management team, all supervisors. It was truly a team effort, a great job done by all, and with leadership of our treasurer. I think it was a tremendous document, and it reflects well on staff and on our organization. Thank you all.
Thank you. Madam Treasurer or Madam Clerk, we're
No one on the line, sir.
nobody on the line, so I guess we can adjourn.
Pass the bylaw and then.
Pass the bylaw. All right. So if we could pass the bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Orangeville at its council meeting, capital budget held on February 2nd, 2021. May I have a motion for that, please? Councilor Andrews, second by Councilor Peters, all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
And motion to adjourn, please. Councilor Taylor, second by Councilor Andrews, all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Have a nice rest of the evening, and see you soon. Thank you.
Good night, all.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.